All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is 7:02. Let me call to order the meeting of the Merrimack Planning Board for June 4th, 2019. The usual reminders that if you will address the board, please make sure when you do, or before you do, that you sign in on the clipboard on the table in front of me, and you make sure the microphone is turned on and you speak clearly into it so the folks at home can hear you. Our next planning board meeting after tonight is currently scheduled for June 18th, 2019 at 7 p.m. in this room. Let me appoint Nelson into a voting position, filling the vacancy formerly occupied by Mike Redding. And with that, we are up to our Planning and Zoning Administrator's report. Robert.
Nothing tonight, Mr. Chair.
No report from Planning and Zoning. Are there any questions by members of the board for the staff? Seeing none. Item 3 on our agenda is the workshop discussion with NRPC regarding our Route 3 bicycle and pedestrian plan. And we have Matt Watkins from NRPC with us. Robert, is there anything that we need to know before Matt takes the floor?
Nothing in particular. As the board requested at the last meeting, he asked me to reach out to Matt to see if he could attend tonight's meeting to give an overview on the pedestrian and walking bicycling plan. The efforts that have been taking place over the past year, just to kind of bring the new board members up to speed who haven't necessarily seen it, and to kind of recap where things stand. So Matt's graciously showed up tonight to do that.
Thank you for that, Robert. And then, Matt, before I turn it over to you, I want to just make sure that some of the, well, Bill, I don't know, you tuned into the issue, or Neil, we had an obligation imposed upon us by the state to adopt or to consider adopting a state town-wide pedestrian and bicycle plan if we were to continue to have sidewalks built on the state-controlled portions of our roads and highways. This is been a long process that has involved NRPC taking an inventory of some of our roads and what sidewalks we have and where it might make sense to increase them along that corridor. This is the first kind of data gathering piece of an effort to make a town-wide pedestrian plan. And with that, Matt, did I get that right?
You did.
All right.
And I will expound upon that a little bit.
Excellent. Make sure that microphone's close enough to you. I know it's hard to work around the computer, but it sounds good to me. Touch the button there.
There we go. Now we're good.
All right. Go get them.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Yeah, and this is a short presentation. I don't need to take too much of your time, but the purpose of so tonight's agenda is really to talk about the purpose and need for the project. Kind of remind the folks that have been on the board for a while who have seen this before, and then to kind of give some background to the folks that are new to the board and haven't seen me here before. So I'm going to talk about the purpose and need for the project scope. I want to review the planning process that we've gone through, and then kind of summarize the draft plan that we've come up with, and then talk about next steps. So yeah, my name is Matt Watkins. I work for the Nashville Regional Planning Commission, and I always like to take a minute to not everybody knows what the planning commissions do, and I think it's important for people to know that. So NRPC, or Nashville Regional Planning Commission, is one of 9 planning commissions in the state. They were created, we've been around for about 50 years. The planning commissions were created by the state legislature way back in those days. This map, the middle of that map, shows the region that we are responsible for. It's 13 communities. It's voluntary for the communities to participate in the commission, and but they do pay dues. So you can see that the 13 communities include Pelham and Hudson and Litchfield on the eastern side of the Merrimack River, and on this side, in addition to Merrimack, we have Nashua, Hollis, Amherst, Milford, Mount Vernon, Brookline, and then Mason, Wilton, and Lyndeborough. So you can see that we have everything from the second largest city in the state, which is Nashua, all the way down to some of those smaller communities like Mason and Lyndeborough, which have only a few thousand people. And we do transportation, land use, environmental planning, some of the transportation planning we do is we have a robust traffic counting program. Some of you probably over the years ridden over those black tubes you see across the road that may or may not be us, but could be. And we basically keep track of traffic volumes and trends around the region. We do that for our local communities and for New Hampshire DOT and for federal highways. Our land, we do. Whereas larger communities like Merrimack and Nashua have paid staff to assist the planning board, for example, some of the smaller communities don't. So we sometimes provide that service to our smaller communities. Things like that. One of the certainly most fulfilling things we do is we facilitate the hazardous waste collection process in the region. If you've gone to any of those gatherings at some of the landfills. It's fulfilling to see 200 vehicles pull up that are disposing of their hazardous wastes in a proper manner, and that's one of the great things that we do. We're also the MPO for the region, which stands for Metropolitan Planning Organization. Kind of in short, that means we administer the federal transportation planning process for the region, and there are a lot of ways you could parse that, but for example, you pay 17 cents per gallon for a gallon of gas, federal tax. That goes to the Federal Highway Trust Fund, and then it's distributed back to the state departments of transportation, and through a formula, and we help to make sure that's fairly distributed throughout the state, among other things. But that's in brief what we do. But getting back to the reason we are here. The purpose of this project was to develop a bike ped plan for the DW Highway corridor, and part of the reason is to build on previous planning efforts in the town, which I'll talk about in a minute, and very importantly, to respond to a request from New Hampshire DOT for a comprehensive town-endorsed corridor sidewalk plan for the portions of DW Highway that are under their jurisdiction. The need, as we've discovered through the work we've done, is that the corridor has discontinuous sidewalks, lack of crosswalks. I mean, there are sidewalks, obviously, there are crosswalks, but they are discontinuous, and no surprise that the most walkable segments of the corridor are where sidewalks and crosswalks exist. And conversely, where they don't exist, it's not so walkable. And significant portions of the corridor are not, they don't support anything but the most experienced bicyclists. So, that's the need, is to try to address that in some fashion. So the scope, there have been two major phases. The first one was to map existing bike ped infrastructure along the corridor, and I'll go into a little detail about that in a moment. And then the second phase, which we'll talk also about tonight, is to develop a comprehensive plan for the corridor. And anybody that has any questions, by the way, just stop me anywhere along the road here. So that first phase, which we did come to closure on basically over a year ago, was to map the existing infrastructure. And the way we did that, so the first step was to develop a base map from a lot of data layers we have in our geographic information system database, all kinds of attributes, of the corridor we already have in our database. But so we developed a base map, and then staff went out and drove and walked basically every foot of the corridor to verify that our base map was accurate, and when it wasn't, we fixed that. And the idea was to identify gaps in the bike ped infrastructure. We also did a level of bicycle and pedestrian traffic stress analysis, so I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And then, and once we had done all of that and gathered all that information and produced a draft map, we came before the board to get feedback on that map. And the final map is sitting over there. It's we're kind of proud of it. It was a real good effort, and it certainly your guys' efforts, the feedback we got from the board and from the community went into making that a good product. And just some examples of what's on that map. This is a zoom into the segment of the corridor that's right nearby. You can see Merrimack, the town hall is just outside of that oval we have there. And, what we did was we identified, issues and things like that. And, for example, in that upper left-hand corner, there's a balloon that says, project in progress. Funding is secure for a sidewalk between Wire Road and Church Street. We had identified that gap, which obviously there's no sidewalk there. It's pretty easy to identify, but, we pointed out on this map that, that's an issue there, but there is funding in the pipeline to do something about that. Down at the bottom, down near, just south of the fire department, again, there's that project in progress to connect Watson Park under the highway over to the trail system on the other side of the highway there. And then we had, for example, a key suggestion there was a crosswalk down across Railroad Street. And one other zoomed-in example is up near the Bedford town line. We noted that, up there the corridor is characterized by a fairly high speed limit, no sidewalks, so obviously that would be an area of limited walkability. So it was a good map. It identified a lot of good stuff. We had already talked about that a while back. So tonight, wanted to go through, the process that we went through to develop this draft corridor plan, and kind of these are, kind of the steps that I'll talk about in a little more detail. We went ahead and reviewed the existing plans that have already been developed in Merrimack. We did some additional data development. There was public input, and with all of that review and data development and input, we identified some key issues along the corridor and then came up with some recommendations and some priorities. So as far as reviewing existing plans and documents, we looked at the town center trail and pedestrian master plan that was developed in partnership back in 2009, partnership between NRPC and the town committee. I forget if that was a subcommittee of this or the selectmen, but you were on that committee, Nelson. But
Yes, that's a separate committee. It's a separate committee
Yeah.
from the planning board.
Yeah.
It reports, the town center committee reports directly to the town council.
Okay.
It's set up by the town council.
Okay. Anyway, so we reviewed that plan. We looked at the Merrimack master plan that was updated in 2013. We also looked at the Mastrocola Safe Routes to School travel plan, which was another partnership between NRPC and a subcommittee in Merrimack. All of those plans in some fashion recommended improved bike and ped amenities in the corridor. That fourth bullet, again, really important. DOT had requested a comprehensive sidewalk plan, developing this plan was in response to that request, and basically, what was going on there is they felt that they're in favor of sidewalks and bike trails, but they didn't want to see them be haphazard. They were looking for a more comprehensive and deliberate process and plan, and they even suggested that the town retain NRPC to develop that comprehensive plan, and that's kind of why we're here tonight. So as far as data development, again, we identified gaps in the bike ped infrastructure along the corridor, and we developed pedestrian and bicycle level of traffic stress, which is, basically that's a way of using the various attributes of the roadway to quantify how walkable or bikeable a segment of the roadway is, and that's all a function of traffic speed and volume and lane width and presence of sidewalks and bike lanes, and all of those attributes that are in our database are used to inform that calculation. And so you can actually see that on the map, and we talk about it in this planning document, what the level of bike and ped stress is along the corridor. So there was public input. We had various meetings here at the planning board. Nelson was the liaison between the planning board and NRPC, and he and I and other staff had had numerous, meetings where we talked about components of the plan and kind of worked things out in that regard. We also had both, physical meetings and electronic email communication with community development about the process and different aspects of when we had questions. They were great about getting right back to us and meeting with us. Same kind of thing with DPW. They're all kept in the loop all along the way. So we did all that. DOT was, again, they're the people that requested this whole thing, and they were right at the very beginning of the process. It was really good. I had conversations with the district engineer, asking him what his expectations were for this plan, and he's very clear about what he was thinking, and that was great. And then so we went ahead and developed this plan, and back in December Mike.
What was
Or Bill, sorry.
What was DOT thinking?
About
You had a good conversation with the district engineer. You said that he had some interesting, what were his thoughts?
Yeah, his thoughts were that this should be a planning level document, that, we couldn't go to the level of engineering, improvements. That would be something in the future when individual projects came up. But, his attitude was a planning level document, and just kind of what I was, kind of beating the dead horse about. Identify the gaps, and identify where conditions were good and where they weren't, and put together a comprehensive plan and try to identify priorities.
Because, DOT has always been the bane of this community's existence for the last 10 to 15 years, so it's kind of, just a little bit, Mr. Chairman, just a little bit. Anything that we put on paper, once we get outside that urban compact, we come into DOT jurisdiction, then I think, for him to say that it's a plain level document within the urban compact, that's great. Anything outside the urban compact, all bets are off.
Yeah.
That's why I'm really curious, and would be interested, what really was he thinking about the proposed corridor from Bedford down to Nashua? Because any impacts that the DOT is going to have as it relates to, running north-south, everything's going to have to go through Concord. You can't have a bicycle pedestrian path to nowhere that only runs from Bedford Road down to Greeley Street.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of defeats the purpose of having this particular corridor. Defeats the purpose of doing the planning that I supported at the town council level to add an additional quality of life amenity to this particular community. So anything that, as you move forward with this process, and I know the former chairman would hopefully back me up on this, that, try and get the DOT to, on verbally, or at least, with the wink and a nod, something that's going to affirm that, they're going to be generally supportive of what this community intends to do 5, 10 years down the road as it relates to developing such a corridor. Because it's going to impact development that occurs up at Wazoric Drive at the Effie Everett Turnpike, and it sure as heck is going to impact any development that may occur down at Harris Pond up to Robin Milligan Parkway. So getting DOT to buy in on this as it relates to a grand scheme of thing is critical from where I sit. Thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, well, we are seeking feedback from them, and I would also add that there is a statewide effort to do a statewide plan. The DOT has retained a consultant to do that, and we have been very much involved with that. So there's another kind of angle that this is coming from, where DOT is, they seem to be invested in it. And I know at the upper levels of DOT, they say they're invested in alternative modes. So, how that translates to the district level is, we're working on that.
There are alternative modes and there are alternative modes. that I've seen come out of the DOT, some of which is acceptable, some of which is just strictly academic.
Yeah.
So, anywho, I apologize.
So, as you can see, we did request feedback. We provided a draft plan to the district in January, and then we followed that up with a request in March. And I think in between January and March, Tim Thompson had requested some feedback as well. Sorry I don't have that date in there, but I know he requested input, and so that's where we're at with feedback from the district, District 5, I guess. But we'll talk about that more in a second. So again, also, now this is kind of getting dated, but there was Nelson and a few others went to last year's April townwide voting and did some surveys. And out of 3,000 plus or minus voters, they got 239 responses. A little less than 200 said they believe sidewalks and bike lanes should be constructed along DW Highway. 23 said no, and 21 said did not answer that question, this particular question. And there were other questions. I won't go through those. Voters were asked to rank certain segments of the corridor that need improvement. So the top ranking was this generally fill in between Town Hall and the post office on the west side of the corridor. Second ranked was again Town Hall to Merrimack Commons up near Tractor Supply. That's just on the east side of the corridor, heading from here up in a northerly direction. Third priority was Watson, just fill in, make a continuous link between Watson Park and Twin Bridge Park. And then came filling in between Reed's Ferry and the post office, Watson Park to Rite Aid Plaza, and then both sides of the corridor up near Reed's Ferry Village. And then the lowest ranking of these projects was filling in between Greeley Street and the residents in Comfort Inn down on the south side of town. So, you can slice this in a lot of ways and talk about a lot of issues, but really what it boils down to is that, that discontinuous sidewalks and lack of crosswalks along the corridor limit walkability, and relatively high speed limits, narrow shoulder widths, discourage casual bicyclists. And, it's basically the issues along the corridor as I see them. I always like to leave this graphic in on the right there. That is that's one survey or one study. There are many studies that are similar results. But what that is, it shows the probability of in a collision between a pedestrian and a motor vehicle, the probability of it being a fatal injury to the pedestrian. So at 20 miles per hour, there's a 5% probability of the pedestrian being fatally injured. At 30 miles per hour, that jumps way up to 45% probability. At 40 miles per hour, it's up to 85%, and then up above 50 miles per hour, it's pretty lethal. I mean, there are other studies that have, different results, but similar. So I always like to put that up there to keep people thinking about, how speed is. It basically, it very much discourages walkers and bikers, the casual folks, from being in close proximity to that kind of traffic, and that's one of the reasons it's not so walkable out there. So, just getting to recommendations, just some general recommendations, or just a few of these, is that the town should consider adopting a consistent roadway cross-section that separates motor vehicles from vulnerable users. So, I mean, the corridor is basically urbanized. It's developed. Speed limits are at least 30 miles per hour. So you're starting to get into that lethal range. And just mixing motorized traffic and these vulnerable users is not the safest solution. So we propose some guidelines, that suggest whenever you can, just separating, just separating those two uses out. I mean, it's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be possible. I think the current cross-section is the typical one. You have, travel lanes, and then you have a curb, granite curb perhaps, and then a sidewalk. That's fine, but what we're proposing is some more separation. So, those are in some suggested guidelines that are in this document. We talked about the planning board making sure that subdivision and site plan regulations are tied to these recommendations. I believe those are the sections of your regulations that address sidewalks. So it would be helpful to just take a detailed look at that. Sidewalks, side paths should continue to be required along the corridor. Again, traffic volumes and speeds, do in a perfect world require segregation. Keeping vulnerable users away from motorized vehicles. As far as travel lanes and shoulders, whenever possible, it would be great to move that fog line in and define 10 to 11 foot travel lanes, and then use that additional shoulder width to accommodate bikes. That's not always popular with DPW directors. I can understand why, but that should certainly be considered. As far as crosswalks, the existing crosswalk should be maintained. Some of them could be upgraded to include a pedestrian phase where that would be appropriate. New crosswalks should be added where we've noted in this document and on that map. And as far as traffic calming, where motor vehicle operating speeds exceed this posted speed limit by at least 5 miles per hour, you should be considering traffic calming, like raised crosswalks or sidewalk bump outs, things like that. But you can't just assume that motor vehicles are going 5 miles over the speed limit. So we would suggest that if you're going to study that, you could do speed studies to identify where that might be necessary. So those are some general recommendations, and then we came up with these priorities, which are kind of based on what voters had suggested and what other information we gathered along the way suggested. So it seems like the first priority would be to link the schools, the library, this town hall area, and all the parks. That was in the town center plan, and that seems like it could be a good idea. That's kind of already underway. There are sidewalks. There are some connections as we speak, so that's pretty doable. Second priority is to incorporate bike ped amenities into the future improvements up at the intersection of Wire Road, and then right next to that Babusick Brook Bridge is going to be replaced coming up pretty soon. So it's going to be a perfect opportunity to incorporate these amenities into those projects. Priority 3 was to further integrate the town center up with Reed's Ferry Village. Fourth priority was to kind of stay on top of that non-urban compact area north of Bedford Road. Up to that's continuing out to Merrimack 10-pin, that Flatley project, all of those projects. There are lots of opportunities up there, so that's a priority. And then on the south side of the urban compact, also try to connect the town center just to the south, and also down towards Greeley Street, and then kind of a catch-all priority. And there is much more detail in the document. This is just, I don't want to go into that level of detail here. I mean, I could, but I don't think that is necessary. All of this is in this document. But anyway, priority 7 is there are various gaps all over the place that can be addressed in the future as funding is available and as priorities change and shift. So that's kind of a summary of where this plan is at. So we had talked, Mr. Chairman, we had talked about how to move forward, because I think it's important to get DOT feedback on this and input. And, you know, they haven't chosen to provide feedback, so we were thinking that a way to move forward would be to just, you know, go ahead and have this board set a date to adopt this plan. You know, we can, and then inform DOT of your intent to adopt, and we can provide a letter. We could provide a letter that you guys could, you know, adjust as you see fit, but provide that letter to DOT and tell them you intend to adopt this plan and you really want their feedback. And then the next steps would be to whatever that final input is, we can incorporate into the document, and then you could adopt this at your July meeting or sometime soon thereafter. So that's what I have, and I hope that's interesting and provides some food for thought and is helpful.
Thank you, Matt. It's very helpful to me to have kind of an overview of the process that we've gone through so far from beginning to end, to know where we're at. I don't disagree with my colleague, Mr. Boyd here, who believes that DOT's input is necessary and would be valuable in this, but there's only so much you can do to try to solicit that feedback before you got to figure out how to move the plan ahead. I have mixed guesses as to why DOT's feedback hasn't been received yet. I think they may be kind of occupied with other things, but I think in general, from their initial communication way back in 2013, their thought was that we ought to have a comprehensive plan, but they were pretty clear, I think, in various meetings after that, that they didn't particularly have a plan in mind. They just wanted there to be a comprehensive plan that meant something, so we weren't doing piecemeal construction. And as long as we achieve that goal, I think it's a pretty low bar that they're actually applying to this to be willing to move it forward. I think the other piece to this is that a great bunch of this plan, but I'd say probably 80% or better, is not in the state-controlled area of town. There's a little bit above Bedford Road, a little bit south of Greeley Street, but the bulk of this happens in that town-controlled zone and area. And I would suspect that the DOT would look at that and say, we don't have, it's not our area. We don't want to weigh in on, not on our plate. Now, all of that is entirely speculation. It may be that their letter is half drafted, just waiting for a signature, and they'll send us some feedback tomorrow. Who knows? Either way, I think the more important piece to this is that this has been going since we received their letter in 2013. 6 years is long enough to chew on this particular bone, and it's time to move it forward. Maybe July is a little quick and August is the right time, but sometime in this summer, this ought to get in the books and be done and start to see some development of regulations that support the plan come forward. That's my thought, my summary. I want to open up the floor for other planning board members to have their comment and thoughts on the plan as presented and what our next steps ought to be. Does anyone have any comments? Nelson?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Mr. Chairman, I agree with everything you've just said. I think you've summarized it well as to where we are. I think Matt left out several of the attempts that we made to meet with District 5 and get input from them. And all of them have been met with without response, mostly. And myself and Jamin Kara personally talked with the commissioner of motor vehicles, the commissioner of DOT, and told her our problem, and she said she would look into it. This was back in March, I think. So I think that we've gone about as far as we can go without input from them. I think we're not going to get it. I think they don't want to be responsible or whatever. They don't want to bless off anything that they might come back to haunt them later. So I don't see waiting for them. I think your approach is correct. Let's go ahead, wrap it up, send it to them and say we're going to adopt it and do it. The planning board should just do it. And then we can move on with implementation.
Thanks, Nelson. Other comments? thoughts? All right. Bill?
Mr. Chairman, did you send a letter to the DOT, or did the Community Development Department send a letter to DOT asking them for comments?
I think that they've
Yeah.
sent both letters and,
Yes.
and phone calls, and I think by all reasonable measures, they've done what anyone would expect someone to do for that.
Is
I
it-
haven't personally signed a letter, but
That's-
I don't know if Tim's put one with my name on it. And
Is it possible that you could ask Community Development to forward me the chronology of outreach that they've done to the Department of Transportation?
Sure.
Please?
Yeah.
I know
Absolutely.
Tim wrote a letter, and I saw it. I don't have it here
That's
tonight.
fine, I'd
Yeah.
like to see the chronology to
Yeah,
take
Yep.
it offline.
yeah.
Some of it was on one of the slides a little earlier, but I think there's a couple of more pieces that have been done as well that Tim may have in
Mhm.
his file, so.
Yep.
And just one general comment, I want to thank everybody for including that project at DW and Wire Road. That is something that the town has talked about now for several years. And now that that bridge is coming to almost a critical stage and getting that fixed, including this as a part of the plan, it quite honestly is a necessary first step to be able to have that connectivity going out to Bedford Road and then obviously running south down to Greeley Street. The one thing that I would ask you to consider is actually include the old Bergen property and the library down to Babusick Lake Road as a part of that, because there's been talk at the library of potential growth opportunities, so I want to make sure that that as a part of this corridor plan, that we're including the corner of Babusick Lake Road where the Lowell Memorial Library starts, going all the way out to Wire Road, so that we've got that entire area included, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think that it,
Well, I'm not sure. You're talking about from the library going north?
Going northbound, thank you.
Yeah, that's certainly in the
Perfect.
plans, and that ties in also with the turnpike widening, Bill, because the turnpike
Right.
widening requires a new bridge on Wire Road, which we want to have sidewalks put
I-
on, which I spoke to at the hearing. The response I got from the state on that was they would consider doing it on one side of the road, and I asked for two.
You should ask for two.
I did.
It
Yeah.
narrows at that particular, at that bridge, it narrows.
Okay, appreciate any support the
no,
council
you
can
got
give
it.
us in that.
You know, the
That
fact
regard.
that there's no fencing at that bridge, that, somebody could do it's relatively, all you got is excuse me? It is aerially accessible from Wire Road down to the turnpike. So that needs to be considered as well, which we brought to their attention, so.
and putting sidewalks on one side of a bridge just invites pedestrians to cross the road around the bridge.
Well,
or
that's
back and forth,
exactly
and
why
that's
we
dumb.
wanted it on both sides.
Right.
And there's extensive residential development on the west side of the turnpike on both sides of the road. There's the Brick Mill Park and then there's the Mallard Point. And so they both produce pedestrians that might utilize a pedestrian way getting to Route 3,
Well, I
library,
mean,
et cetera.
it raises the issue whether you want to continue the connectivity down Wire Road to Mallard Point, which already has sidewalks in place,
Yeah.
so.
And we're trying to get them to stretch those sidewalks as far as we can. After that, it'll be
You
the
know how
time.
I
You
felt
can.
about that at the council level, but I think
Yeah.
that's certainly, I can kind of sort of agree to see with.
Now, what Matt's done for us is the Route 3 corridor, and so we're getting a little bit outside that when you start to head up Wire Road
Yeah.
towards the subdivisions and developments, and we should talk about whether we integrate some of those things into the plan. There's also a talk about the couple of gaps up Babusick Lake Road as you go out towards Madeline Bennett. There's not actually that many gaps along that way, and some parts of the plan could make priorities out of those sections, even though they aren't necessarily in the study area that Matt and his folks had focused on.
Okay, I think those went beyond the scope we gave to Matt. But,
No, yeah,
But, yeah,
no question,
That's
but
okay,
there's,
yeah.
those are two separate things. The scope of Matt's work is completely different from what we choose to put into a town-wide.
absolutely, correct.
And
Yes.
so we can certainly use the benefit of some of the techniques that he's shown us and
Mhm.
talked to us about
Yeah.
for finding gaps and things. Anyway, it sounds like there's a consensus of the board for what to do with this. I don't think that it requires a vote. Let's, Robert, get Bill the chronology that he wants. Let's communicate this plan to DOT as something the planning board plans to adopt in either its July or August meetings, and put it on the agenda for whatever of those meetings looks the most suitable for being able to have the discussion about those things. Does that make sense?
Who was tasked to write the letter to DOT telling them we're doing this? I've forgotten.
You know, the I just mentioned it, but I think the department would be the one to send it.
Okay, have Tim
Yeah.
send it.
Yes, it doesn't.
Okay.
My name doesn't carry any particular influence or sway with them, and Tim will be able to do it without delay if he's not chasing around my review
I just
and
wanted to be
signature.
clear, that's all.
Yeah, understood. I mean, I'm glad to sign letters, but if you're asking me, if you want me to review it after he drafts it and then sign it, it just slows things down. Matt, thank you very much
You're
for
welcome.
coming in and doing this, and also doing all the work that went into the plan. It's been very, very helpful, and you guys have been a great partner for the town on these kinds of
Well,
things. So.
been our pleasure. And yes, there's a lot of staff that have been involved with this, so it's been a team effort for sure. But thanks.
Thank you very much for doing
Yeah,
it. I
thank
really
you.
appreciate you coming in. Okay,
I'll see you Thursday.
Yeah.
turning to our agenda, item 4 on our agenda is John Flatley Company as the applicant and Gilbert Crossing LLC as the owner. It is continued review for consideration of an amendment to a previously approved site plan to include security gates and cameras at the entrance to the Gilbert Crossing multifamily development. The parcel is located at 3 Gilbert Drive in the I-1 Industrial and Aquifer Conservation and Wellhead Protection Districts. Tax map 6E, lot 37, case number Planning Board 2019-13. It is continued from our May 7th and May 21 meetings. And I will recuse myself and turn over the gavel to our distinguished vice chair for the conduct of this business. You got it, sir. You run the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think from what I've just sort of received, I would humbly suggest, Kevin, that you made some changes to what was in the CUP. So you have the floor.
Thank you much. Am I on? Yes, I am. Okay. So I guess before I get into the gates that we spoke about last time, I just handed out a reduced size plan of the previous CUP plan. So this one has been changed. We've discussed in the office, and I think we've finally gotten something that the board, as well as myself, will be a little more happy with. That being specifically on the sheet you have in front of St. Gobain, we've got primarily industrial warehouse flex type buildings. And to the left, where there used to be a very large big box sitting there, would now be the smaller retail plaza. I know this is something that the board has kind of wished for from the beginning. I'm going to say I'm on the same page with you, so I'm happy to, and again, this isn't formalized yet, but this is the game plan going forward. I plan on speaking with the planning department tomorrow just to see what we're going to need to do as far as modifying the CUP plan. I think traffic-wise, as far as the warehouse uses in front of St. Gobain, that we may be able to get rid of that other roadway that came out across from the Webster Apartments. I know that was, so we had a couple of people here that were not big fans of that. I think that the traffic is going to be low enough for those uses that we should be able to use the St. Gobain entrance for that purpose. Would obviously have to take a look at the retail portion also. That was designed with the roadway on DW as it's shown here. Also had a traffic signal, probably gonna just rerun that and see if we're gonna need, still need a traffic signal. For big box, probably would need it for this use. My guess is it may, but it may not. But this is the direction from this point forward that we hope to go in. The colored building to the far right would be uses that are allowed in the industrial 1 district, which are uses that are supplementary to industrial uses. That can be stuff like restaurants or banks or offices, that type of thing. So basically everything on the right-hand side of the sheet from St. Gobain to the north, which is to the right, our use is already allowed in the I-1 district. And to the south, we would do the retail, obviously in a smaller scale than the big box that we previously had on here. I personally think this jives a little bit better than what we had previously. I think and hope that the board agrees. So I guess before I go forward with discussing the residential portion that we spoke about a couple weeks ago, I'm wondering if the board has any questions or comments on this before I set up to meet with the planning department and then probably come back to the board for modification.
The quick answer from me, seeing this, is that this represents a significant, or reasonably significant change to the CUP. And as such, I don't think we should make any moves tonight without having a proper presentation on the CUP. But that's my opinion. Whether we agree to the gates for the residential area or not, that's, you could decide whether to do it or not. But I'm concerned that you've taken out the road, the inter-plot road, which seems to have disappeared, which I suspect is not going to go down too well in some quarters. But this is such a difference. I'm glad to say, I mean, I've been voting to you to get rid of the big box because you were never going to fill it. But I think, personally, I think there should be a full proper presentation before we start tinkering around with little bits. But
Right.
that's my personal
Yeah.
opinion.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
The agenda item, as it reads for item 4, as previously Chairman Best had indicated, was continued review and consideration of an amendment to a previously approved site plan to include security gates and cameras at the entrance. So I'm functioning under the premise, and I've done my preparation based on we're going to be talking about the residential portion of this project and not the retail portion of the project. So would it be fair to say that any conversation regarding the retail pad is premature and that the planning board should have a more formal presentation so that they could be introduced to the project?
I think that's what I was trying to say.
I understand
You said
that.
it much better than I did. Thank
Yeah,
you, Mr. Boyd.
and that's my plan also. I just wanted to point out to the board, get any just quick thoughts on it, but yeah, there will need to be a formal presentation.
I think having quick thoughts right now, through the chair, respectfully, Mr. Walker, is premature. We should be talking about security gates and cameras tonight.
And nothing else.
And nothing else.
Is that comfortable, Mr. Boyd? I think it's made a good suggestion.
Thank you,
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman.
So I guess
Thank you.
So we'll move over to the security gates.
Yes, sir.
So through the decision of the board, the gates are not necessarily, the gates do not need to be approved by the board. The condition of the approval was to be sure that the residential portion will connect with other portions of the site. And I can tell you that the gates are going to be automatic gates. They will lift with a vehicle over 400 pounds once it hits the trigger. So there will be connectivity. But again, this is just a security measure for the residences. I actually attached a handout on the gates, and I actually took a picture of one of our projects that has these gates that shows you the picture as it's taken and the enhanced picture if you need to see what the plate is, to show you how clear that can be for any purposes that it might be needed for security-wise. So I guess as far as the board is concerned, the question is, will this residential portion be connected to the remainder of the site? The answer is yes.
Okay. All right, so then we do go back to the gate discussion and concentrate just on that. And what we seem to have got is a plan of how the gates work. the point that you made at the last meeting, and I will, to refresh everybody's brain, for those who weren't here, was that the gates would be open during the day, and I think we defined the day as daylight to, sun up to sundown, and that they would anyway be located near your site or your, if you like, site office. I use that as a rather bad
Clubhouse,
term, where your staff will be based in, and then at night the gates would operate as soon as vehicles come up against them, but taking the picture of the number plate of the vehicle. Did I
but
cover it all right?
just about, the cameras would be working the full time though, even when
Oh.
the gates are permanently up, when that weight pad underneath the gate is triggered, the
Okay.
camera will shoot cars coming in and going out.
So, having hopefully given those who weren't at the meeting some insight to what was said, the question was put to us that we should agree to the gates or not agree to the gates, and at the end of the day there were only 4 people here, and we came to a tie, which under normal rules, if you can't agree something, it fails. So Mr. Walker asked if we could have a second bite at the question when we had rather more people here. So I'm open to suggestions from anybody what they want to do about these security gates.
Well,
Please, Nels.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the thing is, he showed us a different picture now. The security gates that we voted on before had to do with the old configuration. I mean, they were in line with the old configuration, and now we've got we really can't consider this new configuration if we haven't agreed to it. What?
Because we haven't agreed to it.
Yeah, So-
The gates are going in the same spot.
Right.
yeah. But the new configuration has nothing to do with the gates.
Right.
Well, it does in one way, Nelson, because I think part of the concern that was expressed at the last meeting was that because the big box came between the residential units and the rest of the site, really, it was felt that putting gates on it rather blocked the residential from everything else. Now that with what Mr. Walker has presented tonight, sort of answers a little bit of that question, is that the retail and the residential are living so much closer together, and given that there are 2 accesses onto Daniel Webster Highway, do we want to allow him to put gates in? And that's his question, and I can only say wait till somebody comments.
Well, I guess what I was pointing out earlier, and I don't think I'm wrong when I say this, is that I believe we're allowed to do the gates, period, as long as there is connection in and out of this complex, this apartment area, at all times.
Yeah.
And there is. There's going to be access in and out for any vehicle whatsoever, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I think that's really the criteria that the board needs to look at, and the only criteria the board needs to look at.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I think that puts you well, but what do the members of the board think?
Again, we're looking at the wrong picture.
We shouldn't be looking at that at
We
all.
shouldn't be looking at
Turn it
this.
over,
Yeah, okay.
because we're not.
Okay, we're looking at this in light of the approved
Yes.
Yes.
CUP. Yeah. Okay.
So
I-
you just focus on the one that was in your packet. Just ignore the thing that Kevin handed out, and this is what we're discussing. The gates would still be proposed in the same
Okay.
spot, but it's going to be
Okay. I
based
just-
on that plan.
Wanted to be clear.
Is there any reason why they shouldn't be there?
I think the feeling at the last meeting was that because of the old configuration, and I know I'm confusing it by saying this, that there wasn't much the gates seemed to restrict the connectivity on the site. That was, I believe, what caused some of the issue. But otherwise, Len, your question is very valid. Why shouldn't they be putting gates in there? I can't answer that. It's
And
a
that's
question.
why I wanted to make it clear that there is going to be 24-hour, 7-day-a-week connectivity for
Yeah.
any vehicle in or out.
So,
I don't see that there's any reason not to.
do I
As
take
long
that as a motion?
Not to what? I'm sorry, I don't follow you.
I don't think there's any reason to refuse to allow them. I don't think we can refuse to allow them to put the gates in.
I think you
just-
should all have a look at Tim's memo.
Right, so exactly where I was gonna go.
Tim's
Yeah.
memo,
Yep, the memo that was put in the board's packets dated May 1st. This is what was distributed last
the
time.
one from you, or the one last time, which I.
Oh,
I
sorry,
didn't
yeah,
get.
mine, but yes, I'm sorry, I apologize. Yes, this one is under me. The last paragraph on the first page talks about basically the language in the mixed-use CUP ordinance, and the board's needs to consider whether the language of the ordinance, which requires the permanent interconnectivity of a CUP, is being infringed upon by having gates which could potentially restrict access for vehicles. Now, the applicant's testimony is that the gates are pressure operated, they could be open at all time, they will still exist, but they'll be open all day during the day. Last time the board discussed between the hours of 6 a.m. and 7 p.m., but they're still pressure operated. But the board needs to basically consider that point as if their existence is enough to conflict with the language in the ordinance, because under the mixed-use CUP, the planning board has the right to make that distinction.
And I don't see them restricting access.
Neil?
If I may.
Go on.
So
then,
the original CUP, it showed that there was an access road behind all the properties that would run and connect all of the retail
That's right.
further north. This doesn't affect that
No.
where it is at all.
Not at
So
all.
it still falls in place with the
100%.
requirements of the original one.
Yes.
So then in my opinion, I don't see an issue with allowing it. I mean, if it were to affect that in some way, then I think we would have a discussion here. I mean, otherwise, it sounds pretty clear that if it's not going to affect it, regardless of the new proposal, which, the new concept, which isn't even on the table yet, I guess my opinion is that it seems that it meets the requirement, and then there shouldn't be any issue as to why it should be allowed.
Well, that seems, you and Lynn seem to be singing from the same hymn sheet. Would either of you going to make a suggestion, a proposal, or something that we can? Well, before you do that, let's ask if there's any member of the general public who wants to make any comments about this. What they're basically doing is taking the original plan and where the access is to the 4 and later 5 residential units, that driveway will have gates which during the daytime it will be up, and during the hours of 7 p.m. to 6 a.m., any vehicle coming in will actually have to basically just stop while the gate goes up. It will not, there will be no restriction, they won't have to push any buttons or put any money in a slot. It will go at the gate, but what it will do is that the picture, all the time they're taking pictures of what's going on to the site as a means of security. That is where we are. And I can only say, does anybody in the general public want to make any observations? Please feel free. Come on in, please. Yeah, just move over, let the ladies have a go. Okay, it's all yours. The floor is yours.
Am I on? Can you hear me?
If the green light is green, yes, we can.
Yeah? Okay. Katie Poirier, 11 Kimberly Drive. So I reviewed the last planning board meeting, and so the biggest thing I'd have to say is Kevin keeps referencing another project, and the reason why he wants to have a gate here is in Quincy. Well, Quincy is completely a different beast than Merrimack. The crime rate is completely different. The aesthetics are completely different. Also, Route 3, and I understand completely because I live on that, off that road, is basically a road into Merrimack. And this property is coming, people are going to drive by and see this gate, and they're going to think, oh, is this place safe to come into this town? It's an aesthetic, yes, but, I mean, wouldn't that throw up a red flag to you and be like, oh, wow, why is that a gated community right off the highway? I mean, I don't know. That's one of my biggest things is it won't be appealing. And he also is referencing, again, Quincy, which has a Marriott around it, a medical center. We're a town, we have, all this stuff that is not high end. I mean, I live in between Route 3 and DW Highway. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. I have a whole lot more to lose, and I own my property, than these rentals. And I've never had my place broken into. I don't see why a gate would defer anybody from not going through it. That's just my opinion. I don't think that it would look very
Okay.
nice driving by it.
I thank you for that input. You want to say anything or not? You're just basically concurring with your friend.
So, no. So I, Ashley Tenney, 75 Shelburne. So I also don't fully understand the security part of this. If you're going to have the gates open all day, the gates are going to be open all day. That is your highest traffic time. So if you're going to have people coming in, that's going to be the time. Also, I don't understand the whole how this doesn't block the CUP part of it. It is putting up a barrier between Route 3, the residential, and then the commercial part of it. I thought the CUP part was to have everything be an interconnected portion from where the site starts all the way until where the site ends.
Right.
If you put up a barrier, you're putting up a barrier between where the site starts and where the site ends.
If I'm correct, this is a gate that's going up at the main entrance right outside the clubhouse?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. It's not gonna be put up on the connecting road behind it.
Well, eventually, he was thinking about putting one there.
That's
I
not
haven't-
part of
I
this
haven't
discussion.
I haven't been made aware of any of that, so I
But his
can't
discussion
comment on that.
last time was.
Yeah, neither of you guys were here, but Katie is correct. Kevin did mention that last time. That was not presented in the initial application, so that would have to be up for the board's
something
consideration. Right now, the only thing that's being considered is at the entrance.
That was just my comment.
Okay.
I
Site
understand your
starts at
concern
Route
there,
3
but-
and ends at the other part of Route 3. And you're putting up a barrier between site start and site end. And that's the part that I'm not understanding 100%, I guess. And that I was just bringing up to the board too.
Yeah, the location of the gate is at the main entrance.
Mm-hmm.
That allows you onto the DW highway.
Right.
And that main entrance is also going to be an access road from one part of Route 3 to retail as it shows right now as well.
On
So,
the
it's not
property
the main
from
entrance.
from the apartments to that retail,
yeah.
right? But there wouldn't be anything from the residence to the retail, as far as I understand.
Well,
And two, I believe that this wasn't originally listed on the approved site plan. So I guess I'm just wondering how this is able to be brought up as far as how is this not going to be discussed as it's not an unnecessary hardship, per the RSAs. I mean, there has to be guidelines. There's state guidelines for these waivers. Would you like a copy?
This isn't a waiver.
Well, that's what he's asking for, an acceptance of the waiver of it.
No.
Well,
It's actually an amendment of the,
Well, that's what the staff recommends to respect of any waivers utilizing the criteria of the RSA.
That's any other waivers.
Well, let's not,
this.
we're not going to debate with you. Let us, you've
Well,
made
no,
your
that's-
point,
I was just
and
reading.
we'll obviously take those points into consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Does anybody else from the general public want to say something?
And you, Park.
Hi, Rick Foot, 129 Indian Rock Road. My thoughts on a gate are, it makes no difference. The project's been approved. Putting a gate there or not putting a gate there, whether you like it or don't like it, it makes very little difference to anything. The project was, I don't think, was well thought of. The traffic study was, in my opinion, a very poor traffic study for what it's going to do to the traffic there. But you're back to the gate. At this point, it makes no real difference whether you do it or not. I mean, it doesn't really affect anything, and won't really change anything. My only concern would be if there's cars backing up from pulling in there to wait for the gate to open up, where it'd cause more traffic. But other than that, not much you can do about it.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay, Kevin, come on back. Well, do my colleagues want to ask any further questions? Do they want to make a motion, or what do they want to do?
It always helps to look to your left.
Sorry?
It always helps to look to your left.
He's been waving at you for the past 10 minutes.
I didn't realise. I
I've been-
apologise.
I've been doing the
Well,
Danger
you see,
Will
when
Robinson
you're-
thing,
when
Danger
you're-
Will
you're
Robinson.
Normal, you punch me and then I go on.
I abhor violence, so. I was not here at the May 12th meeting, Kevin, so please indulge me. As it stands right now on the current CUP plan, there are two entrances. Is it possible to come in on the entrance from the south, go through the entire property, and come out on the entrance on the north?
On the currently approved.
On the currently approved plan?
CUP, yes.
Yes.
is the
Yes.
answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to be making a presentation to us in the near future regarding the retail pad. Is it conceivable that that road is going to be eliminated so that you have two separate roads, both going in and out, one of the retail pad and one of the residential pad?
No.
No.
The residential will be connected definitely to the retail, and then depending on how our discussion goes with the rest of the board, we could connect it through to,
It's up to us.
to the buildings in front of St. Gobain. To me, and this is just my opinion, you've got residential, you've got retail, and then you've got basically
Something else.
small warehouses and that type of thing.
Right.
There's no real connection between that.
So there's,
That I
there's,
can
there's,
see.
there's three different ways to get in and get out, to get to the warehouse, the retail, and the residential as presented, correct?
In existence.
And- and-
Currently, there's four.
CUP, yes, sir.
Okay, so there's, I'm sorry,
Currently,
four.
there's four, yes.
Correction, there's four.
I read the conditional use permit, and I also read the minutes of the last meeting so that I could educate myself. The concern that I have as it relates to the spirit of the CUP is the connectivity piece, because as I see it, retail's meant to be retail, warehouse is meant to be warehouse, residential is meant to be residential. Traffic should not be the wild, wild west going through your property, from how I feel about it. You could conceivably have people leaving San Gobain, going to the retail, coming in the back way at 8 o'clock at night and exiting out when the gate is down, actually exiting out
Do the apartments?
through the apartments, conceivably. I'm not saying,
Yeah.
is that gonna happen? I mean,
No, there's no.
I could get hit by a car tonight. I mean, that's like one in a Google, that's
yeah.
gonna
I
happen.
mean, it's literally the longest route out of the site, but yeah, of course, conceivably it could.
The end of the day, I don't necessarily have any druthers about the gates per se, but I agree with my neighbors. The optics is horrible. You know, in a planning board level, you know, when I look at the spirit of the ordinance, I have to follow the letter of the ordinance, and it's quite honestly, it's very silent. It's very silent on this particular issue. But when I put on town council hat and I look at what we've done in this community over the last 8 years as it relates to public safety, first responders, we've been recognized as one of the best places to live here in the United States. Otherwise, you folks wouldn't be building where you're building right now. We have one of the best police departments in the state. We've been recognized by Neighborhood Watch, which uses FBI statistics that ranks us 18th in the United States as one of the most safest places to live in the United States. It boggles the mind that you would consider putting in a gate when this community has had a strong record, strong, effective, and positive record of community policing here in Merrimack and in the state. I mean, we're recognized as a leader, Kevin. So I'm not thrilled about it. I'm going to be very candid with you. I am not thrilled about that at all. But there's nothing in the regs that says I should vote against you. I would ask.
Understood.
I'm more than happy to support, reluctantly support it. Okay. But I do with great trepidation that the optics in this community, what you send, the optics of it alone, is certainly worthy of your consideration, Mr. Flatley's consideration. I would ask you to take that,
Understood.
please take that under advisement.
And I will, thank you.
And as a full disclosure, my cousin was the director of planning and development when Crown Colony was built back when I was a senior at Boston College.
No kidding.
And it was my senior thesis at BC.
No kidding.
No kidding. So, anyway.
Interesting, small world.
Very small world.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Lynn?
I completely agree with Bill. I think there's nothing that prevents this from occurring based on the proposal. The fact that you've got access during the day, the fact that you've got access anytime. But I agree. I don't think there's a need for it. But I don't think we can prevent it.
Correct.
I will convey this tomorrow, just so the board is aware.
Nelson, Neil, anything else to say?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to approve the request for.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Part-
Staff would like
Yep.
to-
Before
Sorry.
we go that far, going back to the abutters' points, this is being presented as a waiver full site plan, which is kind of where they were going. So the board would need to consider the request of if the waiver full site plan is appropriate. So that's where they were talking about in the memo with the
All right.
the
Okay,
criteria. So
thank you.
do that
Yes.
first, then we can go to the motion.
All right. So
I could
what you're
hardly
saying
hear.
is that there needs to be a waiver of a full site plan, or that we consider this is just an amendment, so there's
I
no
would
need to
move
have
that we
have the full
waiver
site
full
plan.
site plan
Yeah.
review.
So,
Amendment.
is that a motion?
That was a motion.
Second.
Okay, seconded. That was seconded by Neil
if I could-
and proposed by,
One more point of order, if I could ask Nelson to clarify which criteria this falls underneath.
Don't sign, Mr.
Well,
Chairman.
because it's a very minor change. Well,
is it here on the pad?
Pick one.
Well, I don't think either of these apply.
They have to.
No, they don't.
Strict conformity or specific circumstances?
We haven't done this for every waiver of full site plan review.
Yes, when Alistair's made the bulk of these motions, when he's made them, he said, based on the criteria that strict conformity would pose an unnecessary hardship, is how he,
Well, okay,
yeah.
strict conformity would impose an unnecessary hardship,
Okay,
obviously.
thank you.
Yes.
Is that okay for you? So, all in favour of the waiver of full site plan review, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No, anybody knows, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 0 for the waiver of site plan. Now, Nelson, did you want to make a second motion?
The second motion I would make is to grant the request to allow a gate as described by Mr. Walker here in this meeting, with the hours being, do we agree on the hours? So we've sunrise to sun,
Dawn to dusk.
Yeah.
well, he said 6,
Yeah,
We actually, at the last meeting, we agreed 7, the gates would be functional between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. That's for somebody coming in, but otherwise they would be open for the rest of the time.
is that okay with you, Mr. Walker? Is that what you
Yeah,
wanted?
I mean, if you'd rather go like dusk to dawn, because the time changes.
Right, I think
It-
that's
All right,
Dusk to dawn, Mr.
Dusk
Chairman.
to dawn, okay.
dusk to dawn, then I would waiver. Yes, those conditions be included as part of this approval. In other words, we're
Okay.
approving it with
Nelson.
those.
Yes.
Nelson's made a motion to
Yeah.
allow these gates to be installed based on the information presented to us and the modifications that he's just outlined. Does I
Yes.
find a second? Seconded by Lynn.
Would you ask Bob that works?
Hmm?
The motion works?
Yeah, so I've got that you're making a motion to approve the placement of the gates at the entrance, that they was, be operational, I guess, open from dusk to dawn, or operational from dusk to dawn. Did the board have any other, because we had discussed other issues last time that have not heard those come up tonight.
All right. So I'll call the, are you happy, Bob? I'll call the question. All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
And against? Aye. And I'm abstaining, so it's 3-1-1. The motion is passed. Kevin, you can put your gates in.
Thank you very much.
Although
Appreciate it.
we emphasise, two members of the voting yes did emphasise to you that we wonder why they're necessary.
Understood. I appreciate
Okay.
it. Thank you
And we
very
look
much.
forward to having a new presentation on a new CUP
Yes,
very
hopefully,
soon.
hopefully in the next month or so. Thank you.
I hope it's more than.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin, very much
Thank you,
indeed.
Kevin. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to point out in the minutes of the last meeting, the last time we voted on this, we did not vote to waiver full site plan review. And
Well-
according to the minutes, just,
Which perhaps should have done. Never mind,
Question.
Nelson. Let's
All right.
not drag that one on any further. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to welcome you back. I look forward to just being myself.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Excellent job, and glad to have you filling in on that one. Item 5 on our agenda is T&S Real Estate Holdings LLC as the applicant and owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of a site plan for modifications to a previously approved site plan regarding parking and buffers. The parcel is located at 280 Daniel Webster Highway in the I-1 Industrial and Aquifer Conservation District. Tax map 3D2, lot 11. Case planning board, case number planning board 2019-18. Robert, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Just briefly to recap for the board, this applicant came to the board in November of 2018 to discuss a conceptual plan to correct some unpermitted parking expansion that had taken place on the site. They've been working based on the board's feedback in the background for the past several months, trying to put together a formal site plan, which they are now here to present to you tonight.
Thank you, Robert. Please introduce yourself for the record and then tell us where we're at with the project.
Certainly. Kevin Anderson with Meridian Land Services. As Robert just indicated, several months ago we were before this board in a conceptual phase to discuss how to proceed with parking. Parking was our primary concern. Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'd like to go through my presentation. There was a number of notations in the staff memo that I'd like to correct, and then I believe the proper protocol would be to try to accept the application in that point.
Thank you.
Okay.
Please proceed with your presentation as you see fit.
Perfect. So earlier in 2018, the applicant expanded parking at his site. To the rear of the property, which is identified as Area 1, he added, I think, about 6 to 8 parking spaces. The yellow area, he added another handful, 4 parking spaces. And he paved an interconnection between his parcel and the abutting VFW building. Unbeknownst to him, there was some violations involved in that. To the rear, that's the buffer to the condo association. To the left, or the yellow area, was actually an encroachment onto the abutting property, and it's really not an approved interconnection between two properties. Touching base on Area 1, let me take a step backwards. My primary objective at the conceptual meeting was to try to find additional parking. I put most of my focus on trying to prepare a parking agreement with the VFW that really didn't go anywhere, so we kind of gave up on that effort. Today, I'm really trying to proceed with bringing the site into compliance. What is important to note is there's an approved site plan for this site from back in 1986 that looks identical to what the existing conditions were prior to the improvements that the applicant made. So to bring the site into compliance, I'll touch base on Area 1. Area 1 was the removal of the buffer to the abutting condo association. Looking at the ordinance, I have the ability to prepare a buffer, which incorporates a variety of plantings and a fence that meets the ordinance, and also have the ability to retain 4 new additional parallel parking spaces. The buffer will consist of a compilation of cherry trees, arborvitaes, dwarf yews, and lilacs ranging in height from 2 feet to 7 feet in height. Couple this with a fence, and it meets the town's buffer ordinance. Also, as part of this corrective effort, there's some catch basins and some stone riprap that are encroaching onto the abutting property that will be removed and that area cleaned up. Also, I'd like to point out that if I'm adding impervious area to the site, there's obviously an increase in stormwater runoff. I have proposed and prepared stormwater calculations to eliminate this increase via basically a stone drip edge at the end of that proposed 4 parallel parking spaces. It results in a net decrease from the site. I believe that Area 1 is taken care of. Area 2, this is the parking that encroaches onto the abutting property to the left, identified as yellow on the screen. All of this pavement will be removed. It's scheduled to be removed, I believe, this week. It's going to be restored to its original lawn type area. What I'd like to point out is that I submitted a waiver to Planning Department. This left-hand side, technically, if this was a brand new application with a new building and new uses, would require a buffer that meets the ordinance. I'm proposing to basically bring it back to its pre-approved 1986 plan. That plan identified this parking access pretty close to the left property line. I don't really have the room to put in a buffer. So if a waiver is necessary, I have submitted one. I don't believe it's necessary, as I'm kind of viewing this as a compliance hearing or bringing the site back into compliance. Lastly, the blue area identified on the screen was a cut through to the VFW parking lot. It was actually paved because many of the patrons at the VFW would just drive across the lawn and park in this parking space. We're going to remove the pavement, bring it back to lawn, and we'll work on that enforcement issue if it's necessary. Going through the staff memo notes, I'd like to just make some points of clarification. We are proposing a buffer to the rear, which is in accordance to the regulations, and if necessary, a waiver request has been submitted for the left-hand side. We can ask the board for clarification on that. There was some confusion regarding the stormwater analysis. My existing conditions was in fact the 1986 approved plan, so I viewed any increases in impervious as improvements and offset those through standard design procedures. Staff and the memo have identified the need for the following waiver requests, and I'll just quickly go through them: soils, types and boundaries, stormwater drainage plan, snow storage, a pedestrian sidewalk, and outdoor lighting. I had originally viewed this again as a compliance and not so much as a brand new site plan, so I did not submit waivers for those. I have no problem requesting this board that conditions of approval be placed that I add soils boundaries, stormwater drainage plan, snow storage area, and that there are no outdoor lighting proposed at this site. Pedestrian sidewalk, I'd like to discuss that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. There's a note in the staff memo that the site is being converted from 4 units to 3 units. There are 4 units. There are 3 tenants. 1 tenant occupies 2 spaces. It's just a point of clarification that I'm trying to emphasize. There's really no change to this site since the original approved 1986 plan. And if, touching back a little bit on this sidewalk, if the board seems it necessary that it is a waiver request for a sidewalk, I'd like to emphasize again that there's no increase in use, there's no physical change to the site other than bringing it back into compliance where it was constructed per an approved plan, and that's really going to be one of our discussion topics tonight. Couple more topics that this board should be aware of is that when we did our existing condition survey for the site, a small sliver of pavement in the very front of the property encroaches over the 20-foot parking setback line. With that, there's a catch basin. Both of those we brought to the attention of ZBA and, if necessary, an equitable waiver. I'd like to try to have some discussions on, is there such thing as a grandfathered status? I haven't looked into that, but I just wanted to make sure the board was aware of that. Also, the sign that has been erected on the site, back per the original plan, is within the, it's not per the ordinance, it's too close to the front setback. That will require a variance from the zoning board. So as you can see, there's a multitude of areas identified as part of this review of the old application, and I'm bringing it to the board's attention. There's a comment in the memo about the request that this goes to Fuss and O'Neill for a third-party review. We request that, seeing the simple nature of this, that might can be removed as a condition of approval. And lastly, I met with Conservation last night. This site is within the Aquifer Overlay District. Their request is to have no phosphorus and nitrogen fertilizers used on site, which the applicant is agreeable to, and for me to inform the client of the Green Snow Probe program for reduced salt usage. At this time, Chairman, I'll turn it back over to the board for some discussion.
Thank you. Apologize, I'm looking at the report from the Conservation Commission from their Monday meeting. Soils tested before the application of fertilizers, no phosphate slow release. Seedings and plantings should be native, not invasive, and the use of salt should be performed by a green snowplow applicator. So essentially similar to, a little bit more detailed than
I haven't seen the memo, so.
What's that?
I haven't seen that memo yet, so it was news to me that they had submitted it.
They send them to me by email
Okay.
almost immediately at the end of their meeting, and I think they send them to the department as well. We
I
can
will-
certainly get a copy
I
of
will
that,
look for
but
that.
those don't seem to be particularly onerous conditions that usually applicants are able to address. So I want to begin the discussion really with getting a little bit of information from staff about the procedures we're to approach with this. The applicant is suggesting this notion of considering this as a compliance hearing, and the planning board and the staff seems to approach it as a site plan review. And my thought on that is that if the applicant is intent on coming into compliance with the previously approved site plan from 19, whatever it was, that doesn't require planning board action, if he's simply going to come into compliance with this prior site plan.
It does, in that they are proposing work on the site. There's still more pavement on the site now than there was back in 1987.
No, that's exactly making my point, though. If they were going to do with what was on the plan in 1987,
Oh,
they
okay.
could do that. They're not. That they've got a little bit
Sorry.
different buffer set up and some pavement. Given that it doesn't match the 1987 plan, it can only be a site plan review. It really can't be. I get what you're saying with compliance and bringing it into compliance by proposing this site plan, but it still ends up being a site plan review.
I guess I would argue that whether or not I propose those 4 parking spaces, the fact that I'm proposing a buffer that's different than the natural buffer that was there, under my understanding of what the board is saying, that would require a site plan.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Site plan review. I'm disappointed you weren't able to work something out with the VA and make that interconnection work. We kind of knew when we talked last time. What's that?
VFW, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Not the VA.
Yeah, thank you for the correction, Bill. With the VFW. On the other side of your property, I think we all anticipated that Area 2 really didn't have a solution that was going to work with the neighbors because of the encroachment. I'm interested to hear when we get to the appropriate time what the condo owners and association feel about your proposed solution for the buffer. The staff's memo proposes that since we treat this as a site plan, that there are some elements that would normally be in a site plan that aren't in these plans. And their recommendation to us is that we request that the submission include that before we vote to consider it complete. Do you have comments on that notion, Kevin, on the staff's recommendation?
Of the items that I pointed out, really the only remaining item I'm willing to add the notes to the plan that are necessary and the clarification in a number of locations. It comes down to the request for the waiver to the sidewalk, if I understand correctly.
Right.
Okay.
So in hearing Kevin say that, I'm comfortable with the board accepting this as complete because they're looking to add most of the missing information. Again, like Kevin said, it's really just going to come down to the sidewalk as well as the other two waivers that they already submitted. So that's definitely going to make it complete enough for the board to consider.
Okay, thank you, Robert, for that clarification.
Mr.
And that
Chairman,
actually helps out quite a bit because we can't hear from the neighbors unless we accept it as complete.
if I could make one more correction too, there's an additional waiver. And now that we've clarified that this is a new application, there is a parking waiver associated with this. The original 1987 plan actually obtained a zoning variance to reduce the parking on this site. I believe we had some communication with community development, and it was determined that that no longer stands. I don't really know the whole logistics of that, but we're essentially requesting the same uses for the site, the same parking calculation, except now we're gonna have 4 more spaces associated with it.
Okay. In the interest of seeing that information and hearing the parking waiver, what you're requesting, and understanding this history a little bit more, as well as seeing some of these notes on the plan, if it's the will of the board to accept the application and then continue it to have a chance to get to receive that information, review it, Kevin, would that cause you any particular
Not at
concern
all, no.
with your approach? Okay. Does the board have any other sort of preliminary questions before we take up the question of whether it's complete or not?
Question, Mr. Chairman, does the parking waiver impact the ADA compliance requirement?
When we saw the parking waiver, we could certainly test the applicant's view of that, and that would also be a part of CLD, not CLD, Fuss and O'Neill review, if we chose to require that of the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
And we could take a look at that to make sure that it doesn't. Robert, did you?
No, the only thing I would say is, that's like you just touched on, was if the board deems that this is worthy of a Fuss and O'Neill review. Typically, that's only reserved for cases where drainage impact is going to be worsened after the development. The engineer in this case has provided a statement that it's actually going to be better.
True. If that's the case, if we decide that the drainage calculations are something that we understand well enough not to ask for peer review on, is there another approach to understanding the parking regulations and how those are applied so that Councilor Boyd's question gets answered?
The only thing I can go on is the ADA compliance brief, which I think in this case specified that there'd be 2, I think the requirement of 2 parking spaces, but I'm sure that's something that can very easily be worked out through the process. I don't see any that being an issue to prevent any action from the board.
Thank you, Robert. Kevin, if we end up, if it's the will of the board to accept the application as complete and then continue its review for a later time to gather this information, would you be prepared at our next hearing to address that question about ADA parking?
I'm prepared to answer that question now if I'm given the opportunity.
Please do.
So ADA requirements, they require 1 parking space per 25. In this case, the site warrants per your parking calculations 48 spaces. We're going to be requesting to reduce that down to 29. That would indicate I need 2 handicap parking spaces, and I can stripe an additional space on here as there's already the van accessible striped location here. So I can just simply add the symbol to the pavement and be compliant with ADA regulations.
Thank you, Kevin. Are there other comments or questions by members of the board in order to approach the question of whether we've got sufficient information to make a decision?
Mr. Chairman, it's very minor, but if you look at note 6, it says existing tenants. I do know that the second company they refer to, TriStar Hair, is in fact vacating the site, so I don't know whether that changes your parking calculations at all. Because, I mean, I would have said that 8 chairs and 8 people behind the chairs, you're probably, it might affect your parking in some respect.
I have not been privy to that information. And secondly, I can't fit any more parking spaces on this site, and
I
the building's
understand.
already constructed.
But what
so-
I'm saying is it might actually reduce the number you have to produce, because I would have thought 8 chairs is 16 parking spaces. I'm not sure, but I guess that's pretty well where it is. And if it was something else, it might reduce your numbers. I'm only trying to be helpful.
I understand completely, and I appreciate that, and you are right. By far, the highest use for parking is the hair salon place that's there, so it would only benefit us if it did change. Again, I'm not aware of that information.
I can assure
So
you that they are moving.
let me offer a thought and see. First, I want to make sure Robert agrees with it, that we're taking the right regulatory approach. But if we approach this this development with the understanding that its tenants are a certain thing, and then later there's a new tenant that goes there that says, "Hey, I don't want to have a hair salon. I'm going to open up a Subway," that will trigger some level of review with the staff. And if it fits within the regulation, you can do it. And if you don't, you'll be back here talking to us again.
That's correct. When tenants change hand at plazas like this, we have to go through a parking calculation anyway. So whatever the board ends up granting for a waiver for the parking spaces on this site, whatever the uses that come in end up being are gonna have to fit in that, into that 29 number, or from the maximum number that's there. If they don't, then we can't do it administratively. They'd have to come in here for an adjustment of the waiver. So, yeah, regardless of whether the hair salon's there now and it ultimately changes to something smaller that only requires, say, a handful of parking spaces, it's going to be reviewed at some point in the appropriate party, whether it's us, if it fits, or you guys will end up making the determination.
Thank you, Robert. Other comments on questions as to reaching the point of whether we've got enough information to make a decision? If not, is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we have enough information so that we could accept this plan for consideration.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion?
Seconded.
Go with Councillor Boyd as the second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 6-0-0. Now that we've accepted it for review, I think we've touched on some of the general conversation that we may have with the applicant, but if the board wishes to have any more, I'm eager to open up the floor for the butters. And so I want to give you the chance to have your discussion both before and after that. Any discussion with the applicant? All right, then let's open up the floor for abutters who wish to weigh in, and let's hear their comments. Does anyone wish to, abutters or citizens wish to weigh in? Come forward, please. Take a moment to settle in and sign on the clipboard, and then whenever you're ready, you tell us what's on your mind.
Michael Moy, 50 Century Way.
Michael, I don't think that
You
microphone is
gotta
on.
get
Can you pull it
closer to
closer
the
and
microphone.
touch the button where it says push?
Michael Moy, 50 Century Way. First of all, I'd like to say that it's kind of horrifying seeing 40 to 100 feet trees being removed. With respect to the buffer in red, the trees back there were about 60 to 100 feet, and they were conifers. We were not able to see their building from our side of the property line. And now we can see more of their property than trees. They're just some deciduous trees that look like sticks, so we can see most of their building. Before, we had the conifers, so they stayed as a buffer in the wintertime. And now, what little is there will basically make their property. Their building is, I would estimate, about 30 feet high, and that gives you an idea of how tall the trees were to completely block their building. On the yellow piece, there was a request for a waiver of not having to put a buffer in because there's a lot of shrubbery on our side. Again, there were about 8 conifers removed, about 30 feet high, and so you can see straight through to our property and see their building. So they basically got rid of the best part of the trees. What I would like is a restoration of what we had before. I understand you cannot plant 60 feet or 100 feet or even 30-foot trees. But when he was talking about trees up to 7 feet, we would still have a very nice view of their property, and along with the sound that goes through it. And I would prefer to see conifers there so that they provided the barrier in the winter as well as the summer and the spring and fall. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. White. Are there questions by any members of the board? Mr. White? Thank you very much. Are there other butters or citizens who wish to weigh in?
Rick Foot, 129 Indian Rock Road again. I'm not in a butter, but one thing that does occur to me on something like this is that frequently when you see these developments come in, they want to make adjustments, they frequently cut down tree lines that are around the property. And well, yeah, maybe great for a developer and everything. It doesn't affect other people, like he was just saying. Well, now he gets to look at their wonderful building all the time. In my mind, what that's basically doing is, well, it's maybe good for the developer, it's not good for the property owners, and in fact, actually hurts their property values. When the time comes to go sell their condo, the next person comes in, looks at it and says, well, I don't really like that wonderful view of the building anymore. I don't think I'm interested in buying your place anymore. Well, you know, your taxes are affected by your view and things like that, so it ends up looking like that, you know, hurts your property values in the end. So, you know, when a developer comes through and says, well, I got to make an adjustment here, I want to get rid of the trees here, do this and do that. I don't think any thought is ever given to, okay, you can remove those trees, it's no big deal. Well, how does it affect the property owners? Well, it affects their value. I think it affects the value of their property. My thoughts.
Thank you, sir. Are there other abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in? Please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Chuck Annable, and I live at 64 Century Way. My back window overlooks those pizza place. Regarding the previous gentleman, the property management company has taken down trees. However, those trees were not blocking my view of the pizza place. At night, when the cars pull into the pizza place front ways, the headlights shine into my window. Furthermore, the staff at the pizza place, I can hear them taking their break at the back of the pizza place. So I agree with my neighbor, Mike, that we need to have the same type of trees planted.
Okay. Thank you, Rich. When you said the property management companies remove trees, you mean this applicant that's before us? Not your guys?
Wasn't Great North, it was the one prior to that. They were dead trees, though.
Okay, but it was the owner of this property that did that?
Of Country Crossing.
Okay, so your condo association removed some dead trees, is that what you're saying?
Yes, but they were not blocking my view of the pizza place.
Understood.
If those trees had fallen down, they would have smashed my house.
Okay, I understand. Gotcha. Thank you very much. Questions? Okay, thank you. Other comments or questions?
Mike Minicello, 76 Century Way. I'm probably the closest one to their parking lot. And usually around 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, excuse me, there's some kind of delivery truck there 5-6 days a week. And when they come to deliver, the place isn't open, so they leave their vehicle running. And you're getting fumes, you're getting noise. And then usually when they do start to unload their deliveries, they pull out the track of the back of the truck and, you know, big rattling noise and everything. That's just one item. again, second item is the view. It's, when we moved in there, you didn't see anything. You saw the trees. And now those are gone. You see a lot of the building. You hear a lot of the cars peeling out at nighttime when they're leaving. Another thing I was thinking about, they're going by the 1986 site plan. Does that ever expire? That's 30 some odd years old. So that's good forever? Okay, just thinking about that. Another thing I wanted to mention, seems to me, the way I understand it, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but this work was done without approval from this planning board, correct? So he just went ahead and did it. Ah, geez, if I get caught, I'll ask for forgiveness later. What's that tell you? Just think about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Are there other butters or citizens who wish to weigh in? Sure? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and invite the applicant back up. I certainly have some questions based on the testimony from the abutters, and before I do that, Kevin, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on whatever you've heard that you thought requires some response.
So I'd say the sum of the comments, by and large, are dealing with the buffer, which we acknowledge was removed, and we're making an effort to replacing. 30-foot, 60-foot trees are something that we just can't replace, so there's going to have to be some level of reduction in what we're going to propose for the buffer. We are actually above what is required per the ordinance, and it is a mixture of deciduous and conifer trees. We can increase the number of conifer trees. I mean, that to me is a relatively easy thing that we can do to adjust and to work with the neighbors. I'm not a landscaper. I don't know what trees you can purchase and put in the ground at a reasonable cost. That's something I just don't have the knowledge in. So I'm hearing that they want an increased buffer. Obviously, we can take that into consideration, and I'll listen to the board for comment on that. As far as tenant use and tenants that are there, it's allowed uses. We're going to go back to the original 86 plan. These were allowed entities to be operating there. Again, I'm not aware of any of these noise concerns, but apparently there are some. We can have further discussion regarding that. And I guess I'll close it at that. I'll turn it back over to the board for comment.
Thank you, Kevin. So some of the things that I heard on Area 2, which you want to restore to its previous state, how are you identifying what the previous state was other than removing pavement?
Obviously, I was not aware of or on site prior to the disturbance that occurred. It was my understanding that the majority of the trees that came down were dead. I'm hearing otherwise. We've got two conflicts as far as what's going on out there. I guess I might ask my applicant to come up here and speak to his knowledge of the site, because at this point, whatever I say is hearsay, because I don't have the knowledge on the site. So,
well, it kind of puts us in the same position too, because we weren't there. And I'll tell you, when there's a site plan that comes in out of compliance that's done something like an intrusion, and I've got to decide which side to err on, it's going to be on the side of the people whose property you've decided to pave.
I'm fully aware of that.
So, any doubt about what might have been there, or even just suggesting what ought to be there, that would match as a reasonable restoration. Now, one of the challenges that you got to figure out is you've got to actually, you can put some trees on your site plan, but since it's on their land, you better get them to agree to it. I mean, you can't go digging and start planting trees over there just because you got our approval for it. The delivery times and the idea that there's trucks there late at night, I agree that you're going back to the uses that were there previously, but you're also before us with a site plan, and part of a site plan review, it's not unusual for us to restrict delivery times, and make sure that trucks don't have backup alarms and that dumpster emptying doesn't occur at the wrong times and those kinds of things. And so I think that the board should consider that. Whatever buffer was there was not only visual, but it also reduced sound. And you're going to restore some, and it'll have some sound dampening effect, and that'll continue as they grow. But if there's a consequence to having reduced sound buffering, that's got to fall on your applicant because of the intrusion onto the other properties. Tell me again about the trees that you have planned for the buffer in the back. I remember I heard lilacs and a few other choices, and I want to make sure I understand the heights and what's proposed. And I think that we have from some of our other proposals that we've heard around town a sense that certain arborvitaes and things like that can be planted at 10 or 12 feet tall, which is at least a jump over.
Agreed. These smaller shaped here are the arborvitaes, and you can see they're placed in areas where the majority of the vegetation was moved, and there's a sight line going straight through to the condo association to the rear. The larger ones are noted as the cherry trees, and those are both ornamental. They're deciduous trees, so they are going to lose their leaves. They call it a dwarf spreading yew. These are smaller, low-lying to try to create a landscape scene. And a lilac, we've all seen lilacs. They're beautiful, but they're not very dense. That's a review of what we have for the landscaping plan. This is in compliance with a new use, new site plan buffer, but we're obviously hearing some feedback from the abutters.
Yeah, I understand if you were dealing with a new site plan and you were trying to set up a buffer, but if the premise is that we had a buffer from 1987 that had nice, good 30 years of growth on it, it's, I know we can't put you in a place to tell you to plant 25 or 30-foot trees because it's not possible to do, but we're certainly push you to be as aggressive as you can to make it an effective buffer. Do you know what your building height is? It's a one-story building, right?
It's a single-story building. I'm not aware of the height. I don't think it exceeds 30 feet, probably 25-ish.
Okay.
25-ish is my guess. I don't have that information.
Okay. Let me open up the floor and see if some of my colleagues have some comments they'd like to offer. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My only comment is that the planning board consider a delivery restriction between 9 p.m. and 8 a.m. Pizza Roma is open from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. according to Google.com. So I would be looking for something along those lines to restrict delivery during those hours to mitigate some of the noise concerns that appear to be impacting the people in Country Crossing. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Any others?
No.
Nelson, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Nelson.
Okay. First, a question. There's a couple of things called catch basins and riprap, which is to be removed. It's on the adjacent property. What's with that? And
Those improvements were made as part of the paved section for the increase in parking back in earlier 2018. Those are to be removed.
and what happens to the water that used to go there?
So that was just a conveyance feature. The water was going into those catch basins, and there's actually a detention basin in the rear. I can assure you that my plan as proposed with the 4 parallel parking spaces and the stone drip edge along it no storm water is going to flow on the abutting property. Those areas are just going to be
I don't see
restored.
where okay, if you say that,
Yes.
I'm satisfied if you can do that.
Just a point of clarification off of Nelson's comment, was drainage going on to the condominium property?
It was going into the catch basins. The purpose of the riprap, I can't tell you. I never witnessed it.
No, I
during
understand. I'm
large
just
storms.
asking for your analysis of what you've done. So as it stands right now, that's where it's depositing, correct?
Let me ask for clarification. Is that prior to the improvements?
Prior to the improvements?
It was all staying on the site.
Okay, and then after the improvements, it was going to
There
that
was
catch
some-
basin on the condominium property?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
But in the future, it will all stay on the property.
That's correct.
Second thing is, I recommend to you considering a buffer of the type that's on the property of Merrimack Building Supplies. Between their backyard and the road is a very dense planting of arborvitae, and it really makes a nice buffer. You can't see what's going on in that yard from the highway. I recommend you look at that. I don't know the cost, and I don't know how big a tree you can move, because those have been there for a number of years, but they are an effective barrier, visual barrier right now.
They're also a faster growing.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
Okay, I think that's an important comment. Other comments, Lynn?
Picking up on what Bill was saying about deliveries, I would include things like dumpster.
Well, I meant to include anything that goes on that site, 9 PM to, sorry.
Yep.
From 9 PM to 8 AM.
Yep, I just want to make sure, you
Site's
said deliveries,
restricted,
I
and
want to
then-
make sure
Yeah,
that's
agree with-
taking away.
I concur with you, Lynn.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarity.
Thank you for that. I want to understand a little bit more about the history of parking and the fact that it was done through a variance by the ZBA in the past on this site, and what's happened and how was that approached?
I don't remember if I touched on in this memo, but there was parking at the time the plaza was constructed was actually a zoning criterion, not a site plan regulation. So that's why a variance for parking was granted. It's since been removed because it doesn't make sense to need a variance for something like that.
Interesting.
It is interesting to know that we kind of had a strange process in the past, but I was more focused on when the site was developed, what would have been the required parking and what was the variance that they received?
I can zoom in on that if I can figure out what the heck my computer's doing right now. Bear with me. There we go.
Of course.
So you'll see parking required without a variance was a total of 38 spaces, provided is 23.
So you got a reduction of
15 spaces were deleted to provide the buffer zone to the back of the building.
And now we're talking about 48 needed under current calculations, and you're going to supply 29, so it's 19 short?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Obviously, 15 short was already pretty short. Now we're going 19 short, but I think your earlier comment that there just aren't any places on this plan to stick another parking
To
space.
clarify the parking, the original parking on this plan was based on the retail use, which was probably be at a lower density than, they say, the hair salon. Mine are actual based on what's there today, so it's going to be more. This goes to the point of that Robert brought up, that during the time of issuing building permits, parking gets reviewed, and I don't know when these tenants were approved or any of that, but that's the scenario that I'm dealing with right now.
Yeah. And apparently, after it was built in 1987, there was a need for more parking, and thus we have added pavement in the back and the sides. One of the things that often comes up when we discuss pretty significant parking waivers is clearly posting no parking in places along the roadways and things where people will tend to go when they pull in to go to the hair salon or to Pizza Roma and there's no place to park. Or a delivery driver for the Pizza Roma pulls up and has no place to pull in. And so as we approach the point where we might pause and continue for the next meeting, incorporate that into the next iteration of things where you're going to put some no parking and where you might think people would tend to park without permission or without.
Could I follow up on that, Mr. Chairman, if I might? I know that people park in the Citizens Bank car park because that park never gets full. And a lot of people pull into there if they can't get in anywhere else, they'll go onto the Citizens Bank car park. Now, whether that's a solution to your problem, I think it should be something you might consider, and you might want to discuss with Citizens Bank some cross easement or arrangement, but certainly that is where people go, as well as in Smith Road itself. But that car park does serve as a backup for this site.
I know you were hoping to work out something with the VFW about their parking, and if
So
it hasn't worked out, you
there's a
tried.
verbal agreement between the VFW and the applicant site. To get that to be a written document is a little bit more difficult. And then, having been before this board a number of times, and our discussion at the conceptual, while a written document is good, easements are even better. So, we just left it at that and said, we can have a verbal parking agreement. And to be quite honest, the VFW uses this site in cases of high demand. This applicant has used the VFW, which have alternating peak times. There is agreement in place. I can't get it much for more than a verbal agreement.
And with that even verbal agreement, you still felt like Area 3 had to be removed?
The cross easement, it
Yeah.
doesn't fit the width of a car. It was kind of, I could make a giant cross-through section, but my focus, like I had mentioned at the beginning of this, was to bring it in compliance with the original plan because of all of the concerns about, the tenants, the parking. It seemed the best way to get him into compliance, and that if we have a tenant that requires additional parking, we actually have tangible numbers that we can talk about parking for future dates. Or if the cross easement could be, cross use for parking be expanded, we could have a site plan that incorporates 2 sites and we can really do a larger scale. I'm just trying to get it so that he can pull building permits to construct or to do work within his building, which is at a hold until planning board approval.
Okay, understood. I was just trying to see if there was some solution to the parking that we could try and think through. We heard a little bit from some of the abutters about the traffic that is entering and exiting the site, entering the site, and headlights being able to shine through different areas. And that wouldn't be in the disturbed areas that are related to your intrusions. That would be, I guess, where's my arrow? In the western part, the western corner of the lot. Now, normally, if this was a new site plan before us proposing commercial next to condominium, we'd buffer all the way around that corner too. What do those plantings look like today in terms of whether they're able or capable of stopping headlights and obstructing?
I don't think I have that information to provide to the board at this point in time.
So why don't we, I certainly hear some of the folks in the audience who may have a picture, but I'm going to be cautious about starting to receive things that everybody hasn't had a chance to review collectively. And since we're going to have a chance to come do that again, maybe we'll get a chance. Think about that as well, whether there's some fencing or plantings in that corner that would resolve that question about headlights that are shining across the property.
Okay.
If
I
any.
think at this point it would be wise to continue to the next
Yeah.
month's meeting. The areas that I'd like to do a little bit more investigation, obviously, is the buffer, headlights. I'm very concerned about starting to limit hours on the established businesses that are there. I don't know if there are ramifications, but I think that's something that needs to be vetted. Maybe the hours of operation proposed, limiting deliveries for the hours that were proposed may or may not work. I don't know, and it's way too premature for me to agree to any sort of hours limitations. So I think.
That's why we're coming back in July. We're not
Yes.
asking to, this is conceptual right now.
Yes,
Kevin.
I understand.
Okay.
And I get that there's some need to reconnoiter with your applicant to understand what their needs are. What I've heard the board discuss is a delivery restriction, not an hours of operation restriction.
I misspoke.
Now, that said, that may not be something we ask you to agree to. I mean, it may be
understandable.
Maybe a condition that's imposed by the board. Are there other issues that the board would like to discuss with the applicant before we decide what to and when to come back and take a look? Bill?
I want to go on record that, and I appreciate your candor regarding the narrative of how that work was done on the back part of the property, so I appreciate that. But I am, I'm very troubled because there's part of me that harkens back to one of the things my father used to say to me, I don't feel like rewarding bad behavior, Billy. And I look at this particular situation right now, that even though you're doing compliance work, we're looking at an issue that probably should have been talked about back in 2018 had the I's been dotted, the T's been crossed, and the appropriate processes have been followed. So I would be remiss in not doing my job without making my viewpoint known as it relates to how we got here. So I'm very very disappointed that this occurred on the property and impacted another abutter without following proper channels. So, but I look forward to the July meeting to see what we can do to remediate the property. So thank you for your candor, Kevin. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I agree with and echo Bill's comments that it is always troubling to see any project where someone has done something with a sense that it ought to have had some review and then they didn't. And I understand sometimes people aren't really sure, but where your boundaries are and crossing over to other properties seems like one that people would pretty quickly recognize as needing some level of review. That said, I am always in balance with this approach as a chair of the planning board, that what we do want is in a choice between having someone out of compliance trying to hide it and deny it versus coming forward and trying to fix it. As much as I'm irritated that there was the initial non-compliance, I'm always want to be open to that idea that people can come in here and have a fair review to get it fixed. And you won't see this town or this planning board saying, hey, let's have an enforcement action and see if we can charge $250 for every day that this has been in violation over the last 16 years. And, let's go chase that around. That's not our approach. We always do want to at least be open to the idea of fixing it. But at the same time, it needs to be fixed to the point that it does what it should have done in the first place for the neighbors. Other comments or questions on that? No, Nelson?
I'm still looking for these catch basins that are going to be removed. And you said the catch basins weren't going to be removed. I don't see where they show up on the plan, at least in my...
Well, they cross over onto the condo property at the top of the page, and then the dark line that goes horizontally across the whole top of the property is the new rock drip edge on the pavement.
The existing conditions plan is up on the screen, and you'll see that at the rear of the property, this is one of the catch basins in riprap. This dark line depicts the property line. Here's the second one with riprap. Both of those will be removed.
Okay, so where's the water going? You said it was going to a catch basin without the riprap, after the riprap's removed.
Do you have your development plan with the buffer shown on it? The dark horizontal line that goes completely across the back of the building?
That's
This
just a
here.
gravel...
That's the gravel drip edge at the edge of the pavement that's going to catch all of this drainage and stop it from going further.
That's a new feature that wasn't on the original plan.
That's correct.
And do we have you're going to show us analysis that that's going to work?
I provided analysis already. That's been submitted.
Is it?
It's in your pack.
Okay, it is, okay, all right. And we're going to have that peer reviewed,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it's up
No,
to the
that's
board
what
to
the
decide
board. Yeah. So there's a one sheet paper that's got Kevin's stamp on it that discusses the pre and post construction analysis in
missed
there.
it. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so when
Yep.
you see that, it details. Kevin attests that the post construction condition after they do this work will result in a lesser runoff than it exists previously. And that's why staff has been amenable to not having this go to Fuss and O'Neill and not requiring a full drainage analysis, but it is the board's determination.
Okay.
That's this letter from the package.
May 14th.
But it's up for the board to make that decision about whether it wants to have peer review or not. It has typically been our approach when the staff gives us this kind of information and recommendation to not go to peer review and take a look at those drainage calculations over again. But it is something that the board can decide, and we should decide that tonight so that it can be accomplished one way or another if it has to be between now and whenever we come back.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, I didn't,
So, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we move this to peer review,
Okay.
predicated on the fact that the current improvements that were made in 2018 are now going to be removed. Those drainage improvements are being brought back onto the site, and I think I'd like to have peer review confirm that what Mr. Anderson is proposing to do for his client is conforming with what we are seeking here in the town of Merrimack as it relates to our regulations.
Okay.
Kind of
So-
a long-winded motion, but
Understood. So Bill's motion is that we require peer review. Is there a
Correct.
second?
second.
Second by Nelson.
And just clarify that it's limited to drainage review only.
Limited to drainage.
please.
Okay, anyone want to speak to the motion? I'll speak for my own opinion. I tend to be sympathetic to the staff's view that when you're looking at a reduction in the pavement over what's there today, and you've got a calculation indicating the net runoff is reduced, that's something that we've typically been willing to rely upon. And I'm, as much as I am willing to go down the path that you're talking about, Bill, with, I don't want to reward bad behavior, I also don't want to make the effort to come into compliance anything more than it needs to be, as if it was a new application. And so that's where I stand. But obviously, I'm not that far from being right in the middle on going either way on it. Other comments or questions? Okay, the motion on the floor is to require peer review of the drainage calculations. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4 opposed. Any abstaining? That's all of us. So the motion fails 2-4. So
Feels
that-
good to be on the same side of a vote with you, Nelson. Just want to let you know that. Feels really good.
Welcome to the board.
Oh, well, no, come to the council, you can be a single negative vote in the council, so. I digress.
Okay, so it is the will of the board not to require the peer review of the drainage calculations. Kevin, have we sufficiently kind of highlighted the things we want addressed between now and then? Do you need any kind of a rundown or
No, I think
details
I
on any of it?
took sufficient notes here. I've got my own homework that I need to do, mostly regarding the buffer and tenants. I think the marching orders are clear. I can move forward with this.
If it's the will of the board to have, it is the will of the board to have you come back, when is a time that you'll be prepared to do so?
I should be prepared for the next meeting. I don't know why I wouldn't be.
The next meeting is June 18th in 2 weeks.
We proposed July 2nd.
July
in the memo.
2nd.
July 2nd.
July 2nd.
Time when, noting that there's some abutter interest in this, is July 2nd in the proximity to the July 4th holiday the best time to make sure that everybody has a fair chance to come in and talk and hear it? Or is that kind of a difficult one for the public to get to?
When would the next meeting be? When would the next meeting be, the 16th?
The original Brexit.
Yeah, 2 weeks after that, I believe the 16th.
July 16th would be the next one after that.
So I guess, Mr. Chairman, I agree with your rationale that with Independence Day being on Thursday, up the rebels, down the British. Then maybe the 16th would be appropriate. And it would allow Mr. Anderson ample opportunity to go through his notes and make sure that the site gets a thorough review so that he's prepared on the 16th.
Thank you for that consideration. That's exactly what I had in mind. And while I support that notion, I also want to give voice to the idea that the conditions on this plan came to light more than a year ago already. And so we're going to be at that point of July 15, 16 months into this effort. So hopefully we've got everything tied up and ready to go at that point, and we don't have to see it drag on any further. That's an awful long time to try to get a remedy like this together. Is there a second? Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't make a motion. You just.
So move that the application be continued to July 16th, Mr. Chairman.
No further notice to abutters.
With no further notice.
No further notice to the abutters, that's correct.
And I'll support that.
Seconded by Alistair. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 6-0-0. So we'll see you mid-July.
Sounds good. Can I request a 10-minute recess as I'm going to be presenting the next? I just want to close out some notes with my.
Sure.
Yeah, please, let's do that. So we'll be in recess. It's 9:16 now. We'll come back at 9:25. And let me remind everybody, while you're in recess, to turn your microphones off. On that happy note, let's call this meeting back to order and pick up on our agenda with item number 6, which is Kinsley Osgood Barnard, applicant and owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of a waiver of full site plan review for a change of use to allow a dog grooming business within a building addition to the existing home in addition to the existing residential dwelling. Parcel is located at 9 Harris Avenue in the C1 Limited Commercial Aquifer Conservation and Elderly Housing Overlay Districts and Wellhead Protection Area. Tax map 61, lot 38. It is case planning board 2019-19. Robert, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Just to call out, the board is familiar with this application in a different form. It was before you, I think, a month or two ago. Basically, the previous application was calling for dog boarding, grooming, and daycare. This application is only for grooming. The boarding and daycare aspect has been removed.
Thank you, Robert. Kevin, please introduce yourself again for the record and then tell us about the application.
For the record, my name is Kevin Anderson with Meridian Land Services.
Kevin, I don't think your microphone's on.
I apologize for that. I shut my microphone off. For the record, my name is Kevin Anderson with Meridian Land Services. To kind of go into the site a little bit, it's 0.31 acres. We're talking about a pretty small site. It resides a 100-plus-year-old house. The applicant is looking to construct a 600-square-foot, two-story addition. This is largely a residential addition. On the second floor are going to be bedrooms, first floor garage, mud room, and a small, approximately 100-square-foot dog grooming room. Again, as Robert had touched on, this has been significantly reduced in what we had submitted to this board originally, which did include not only grooming, but boarding and daycare. So essentially, I'm viewing this, even though it's not compliant with the ordinance, as essentially a home business or a home occupation. But we find ourselves in a pretty gray area here. The site is zoned commercial. It has a residential use on it, which is allowed by special exception. And because it's residentially zoned, and this is a commercial business, it technically needs to comply with the site plan regulations. Quite burdensome for a residential addition, quite honestly. I have requested a full waiver from the site plan regulations. I have submitted that to planning staff. Again, there's some comments in the staff memo that I'd like to touch base on, and then we can get into another discussion. As Robert had pointed out, there is a giant glaring error on my plans, and I'll come clean of it, and that is that the title of the plans is Site Plan Dog Daycare. That was an oversight. It is not a dog daycare. This is grooming only. Secondly, there's some interpretation that's going to be needed with the parking ordinance. It's required to have 1 space per 5 animals and 1 space per employee. The applicant lives there, so I don't know that they really need a space for the employee. But more importantly is how do we quantify the spaces necessary for her clients. There's no kennel here, so it's not like you can have multiple dogs here. There might be some overlap, but we're going to need to try to clarify what we need to do with parking. There's a comment regarding ADA, and this is a great valid comment. Again, I'm going to lean back on the residential nature of this application. Access to the site, the left-hand portion of the site contains a garage and the driveway to access this site. That is almost wholly within the abutting property, and there's an access easement and maintenance easement on that allows ongoing maintenance and access to the site in perpetuity, and extends a hold harmless clause in that easement. And lastly, I'll close out. DPW is requesting that the concrete apron, which is right adjacent to Harris Ave, be removed, as it's half in the right-of-way and half on the property. That was the former location of a carport, and maybe some consideration can be made is that that's the drop-off location. If DPW was willing to do that, I still believe that they can utilize the existing driveway, but really I kind of want to get into a discussion with this board and see if we can clarify some of these comments that I've made.
Thank you, Kevin. Let me just open up the floor for some of my colleagues and let you guys lead the discussion if you have any comments.
Mr. Chairman, the interesting thing to me is the notes from Kelly Chamel dated May 30th says they can't find the easement for the use of the 6D137, your abutters property. They say they just can't find it. So do you have the copy of the easement?
I have a copy of the easement. On my plan, I transposed two numbers. It was, instead of book 771 something, it's 711. So it's a transposed number, so you couldn't find it in the Registry of Deeds. I believe I printed a copy of it that I can provide to Robert, but I have a copy of it. Right
Okay.
here.
Yep, fix the citation on the plan, provide a copy to the department so it can
Yeah,
be
but
reviewed and make sure
the
it's.
reference that they say on this plan refers to a property in New Ipswich, but
Yeah.
I pass on that.
If, Chairman, if you'd like, I could read the book and page number. That
Yeah,
way we
please
have
do.
it in the record.
Okay.
It's book 7112, page 856.
7112,
Page 850.
page 356.
856.
What?
8.
856, okay. Okay.
So the page number that you indicated on the plan's correct, it's just the volume number. Understood, not an uncommon mistake. Not an uncommon thing. Okay, that'll certainly clear up some of the questions about the easement and that situation that goes on over there. Once you have that for the department and we can look it up, we can verify what the scope is of what's permitted in the easement. I have some questions about the concrete pad. The DPW is saying that it ought to be reduced to be within the property line and not sort of be essentially a curb cut. Now you say that was a old garage or carport or something. Are you saying that you'd like there to be some kind of curb cut on that part of the property where people could come in to do the drop-offs and?
I think the existing driveway should be utilized as the drop-off. I'm quite honestly trying to save my applicant the expense of having to remove a concrete for the thickness that is unknown. It can be burdensome. I'm really looking at trying to keep the costs down and get her residential expansion and continue her established doggy grooming business. So that's the avenue I'm coming down.
To be honest, Mr. Chairman, having visited the site, I can't see what the concrete pad is doing, but that's an opinion.
It's former foundation from something else.
Yeah,
so
it was
they're doing anything.
you can see there was a garage or something on the site. You can see the nuts and bolts and things that were still sitting there, but
Yeah, it's actually still sitting in the.
I can't see the need to cut that up, but I'm sure Dawn will kill me for saying that.
I think it's really trespassing in the public right of way. I think that's his objection.
Wow.
Respectfully, Harris Avenue is a dead-end street.
It's a dead-end
It's a dead-end street.
It leads, the only thing you can get beyond this is the access to the toll booth collections
Correct. That's
building, which is now defunct.
Correct. So,
Oh, there are a couple more houses, Nelson, but
There isn't a whole lot down
but
there. Now
still,
the
the number of cars going up and down that street, in light of, excuse me? It's negligible.
Yeah.
I think that's an onerous request of DPW, to be honest with you.
yeah, I agree.
And Don will probably email me tomorrow. So
Well, sure.
we're in good company.
No, that's true, but the applicant's lot, 6138, is entitled to a curb cut to access the road. Now, they're using the one from the neighbor's site, but they don't have one on their own property.
That's true.
Well, they have the curb cut, well, concrete.
Well, yeah, and we're suggesting that it be removed and disconnected from the road, which would make it no longer a curb cut.
Correct.
Let's think about that. Okay. So the actual dog grooming business is a 100 square foot, no employees, just the resident?
That's correct. I
Okay.
mean, I say plus or minus 100 feet. I mean square feet, sorry. The size is within 100, 150. It's small in size.
So the intent is the volume is one dog at a time, and there's some little bit of overlap as one comes and goes, maybe, or maybe not.
Correct. She has an established business. This isn't a new business, and she's hoping, I mean, she knows her schedule.
So in terms of car traffic or whatever, there typically might be one owner there. Sometimes there, for a couple of minutes, there might be a second car as
That is
people
correct.
transfer coming and going.
It's important to note that their clients, there's no room for the client to stay there, so they drop the dog off. It's not like you've got a client waiting for their dog, excuse me, to be finished, and then the next one might be showing up and you have a conflict. So that, I think that's important to note.
So how long does it take to get a dog groomed?
I have no idea.
Depends on the size of the dog.
That's correct.
No, I understand that. And you're the applicant. If you want to come forward and you can answer these questions, you just can't do it from the back row. Come on forward and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about it.
Sign in, thank you.
I'm Kinsley Osgood Barnard. And I can't write and talk at the same time, so give me a minute.
Take your time.
How long does it take to groom a dog? Depends on how well the dog behaves. Usually between 45 minutes to 2 hours. But again, it's like, are they going to bite me? Are they going to behave? Or can I get them done pretty quick? Depends on the hair. Husky versus a pug is going to be a completely different situation.
It certainly makes a lot of sense. I get that. What I'm wondering is I'm trying to gauge the traffic that comes and goes. And so if it takes 2 hours to drop off a dog, while you're working on, to work on a dog, while you're working on that dog, is someone else coming in with their dog to drop them off, and then that dog waits till you have a chance to.
I don't like to have more than, it's only me, so I don't like to have more than one at a time, and that actually allows me to do a dog in 45 minutes, because I'd rather them come, groom the dog, send them home. I don't want to have multiple, I've been there, done that, and it just makes me take longer. So I don't like having multiple people, and I also don't like people staying, because it makes the dog's behavior worse. So I don't want benches, chairs. There's going to be no reason. No, you cannot stay. I'm not insured for that. Whatever it takes to get them back out the door.
I got you. Have you been doing this business, is a new business for you, or have you been doing grooming for other people, or?
I have run this business out of Nashua for about 6 or 7 years, and I've been grooming for about 11.
Okay. In a home occupation business or in a
Yes.
commercial site?
Home occupation.
Okay. What other kind of equipment or needs do you have in order to be able to do dog grooming? Do you bathe them and?
Yep, I have a tub, like an actual dog tub, and a table, velocity dryer. That's about it. I might have a kennel bank. Like if they're not good with the velocity dryer, put a fan on them. But that's really about it. I don't need a lot. Grooming tools.
Okay.
I don't need a lot of space.
So your space for doing the work though will have plumbing
Yes.
to do that. Okay.
Electricity, plumbing, yes.
Other comments or questions, Neil?
Will there, excuse me, will there be like a waiting area for them?
I don't want people to wait.
Right.
So
Well,
there'll
I
be an
mean,
area that they
a
can come
check-in
in
area,
and
yeah.
a check-in area, yeah.
Right.
But it won't be a waiting area. I think it's like a 7x3 hallway that like leads into my grooming room would be shut off from this hallway.
Would there be any outdoor space provided for the dogs?
A small, maybe 4x4 patch for them to pee in, but nothing they can run around or like just don't pee on my garden. If you've driven by my house, I have a pretty exquisite garden, so it mainly is to not pee on my gardens.
Right.
Understood.
What's the chain link fence area behind the house?
Nelson, your microphone's not turned on.
Microphone, Nelson.
I'm asking, what is the chain link fence area? There's a chain link fence area shown in
Yep.
my version of this plan, not on that.
Yeah, it's right there.
Oh,
It's
it's
my
there, yeah,
my
yeah.
personal dog. That's where my dogs go. They have their own
Okay, that
run.
has
I don't-
nothing to do with this.
Nope.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have dimensions on this building? I don't see any on this plan, but,
You can see up on the screen. I have copies of this if you'd like me to submit it to
I'd
the
just
members
like
of the board.
I'd like the plan that we're looking at to show the dimensions of the building, the outside of the building.
That can be added. It's
I thought so.
approximately 20 by 38, but I'll add the
Okay.
dimensions.
Okay.
Basically, Kevin, have you and the applicant read through the letter that Kelly put together dated May 30th, 2019.
Yes, I went through it in detail this afternoon as I was preparing for this evening. I noted a handful of items that were corrective type items that needed to be addressed, which I believe I spoke to those already. Is there a particular item that you're pointing out?
No, it's one of my, I sort of tend to throw that as a standard question, you know. Is there anything that you object to and that's been raised that you can't provide either now or when you, they're recommending you come back with a few answers. Is there anything fundamental that's causing you trouble?
Nothing on this is causing any sort of concern.
But you accept that the things need to be, I's need to be dotted and the T's crossed?
Well, I'll agree to that statement. One would love to have this conditionally approved this evening, but if the board does not want to go that way, obviously I can't sway them. There's some housekeeping items. No plan is perfect. I don't have infinite time. And there's some corrections that need to be done. None of them alarm me.
So one of the key reasons for following the staff's advice to continue it is to have them have a chance to look at this easement that you've been able to identify that the staff hasn't been able to see, just to make sure that it supports the use that's existing there. Have you got some resolution or proposed resolution for the rear encroachment, the fence crossing over the property line? Not encroachment, actually intrusion into the neighbor's property.
No, I don't have a resolution for that. This is a result of an on-the-ground survey. I'd like to note that that is a large, there's a swamp towards the back of the property. That's not in a swamp, but there is a swamp in the back of the property.
So the board has taken two different approaches to these at different times when there's an intrusion like this. One is to tell you we can't bless a plan with a boundary line intrusion on it, and go deal with it. And the other approach to it is to put a note on the plan that says the board doesn't bless any intrusions that may be here because it's not within our jurisdiction to do so. And so the board should probably have some discussion with the applicant about what we expect him to do about that particular one. Nelson?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, my suggestion would be to do it in the second method you proposed. Just provide a note on the plan saying the board is not in agreement with, or is not endorsing, and does not endorse this.
Endorse or approve, yeah.
So that protects the board and the applicant, and should some future date, I don't know who the owner is of this adjacent property. What does that property?
It's that commercial property that's at the corner. Its name is
Thornton's Landing?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So they probably have no, and as you say, it's wetland back in there, yeah.
in the vicinity, not there, but there is a wetland back there.
Yeah. That would be my suggestion, Mr. Chairman, that's all.
I tend to support that approach when it's something as simple as a chain link fence. You just say we don't bless it. It is a pre-existing structure that we don't take into account in any approvals that we might grant. We probably need to give you specific language to put in a note, or do you have a sense that you'd know what to put in a note?
I have a sense as to what needs to be placed on here.
Okay. I assume there wouldn't be any objection to having a note like that?
No.
In terms of the discussion about the concrete pad and whether that ends up being some kind of driveway or opportunity for there to be car traffic there, do you have a preference, or do you just want to say, I'd rather not remove it, but I really want the cars to use the other driveway?
If this board is looking to continue this application, I will have a conversation with Dawn. I speak with her very frequently, and let her know my concerns regarding costs of removal and the potential of using it as a drop-off. Get feedback directly from her, and then I'm not asking the board to approve something that staff or DPW is adamantly against for a reason that she's not here to let us know.
Yeah. I mean, when the aerial picture, when the carport was there, that was your curb cut. That was how you turned in to get into the curb cut to the carport. And you're entitled to have one. Whether that ends up being a driveway now that there's no building right there, I think there probably will be a way to work that out. Whether it meets all of the criteria for the way the curb cut's designed with radius and approaches and all of that, I don't know.
And to be honest with you, looking at the plan that has been provided by Mr. Anderson, there's an existing catch basin there, and it looks like that there's a drainage pipe that runs right underneath where that concrete pad is there. So, I mean, I'd make the argument that the concrete pad is actually protecting the drainage structure that exists there, because if you remove that, now any Tom, Dick, and Harry can drive their truck and park there, now it automatically is gonna collapse that entire area in there. At least I think it's providing some delineation there that's protecting an existing catch basin, that's providing some meaningful drainage for Harris Avenue. I mean, that's how I would look at that.
I think potentially so. I also think that if you jackhammered that concrete slab out of there, stand a good chance of breaking the 12-inch clay pipe that's underneath it.
That's true too.
So,
On the other hand, if you wanted to access that pipe, you'd have to jackhammer it.
Yep.
So there's two ways.
Anyway, have a conversation with your client and see what you can propose. If you want to keep it, I would encourage you to meet with Dawn and do your best to convince her that it's the appropriate path. Certainly for us, it's much easier if everybody's in agreement. If we're put in a position of saying the department thinks this and the applicant thinks that, we'll make a decision and we'll use our best judgment, but everybody's always better off controlling their own fate rather than coming in here and saying, what do you guys think? Flip a coin.
Agreed.
Is that another little catch basin in the corner of the concrete slab and the brick walk? There's a little bitty square with little, even tinier squares in it.
Yes, it is.
That's a catch basin.
There is a catch basin there too, yes.
Where does it go?
Nowhere.
Nowhere.
It's man-made.
It's,
It's just a barrel. It's actually full now.
plunge
but-
pit.
A leaching catch basin.
Yeah.
Homemade, improvised. There's actually a catch basin, if you'll note, way out here in the middle of nowhere.
yeah, I saw that.
In the middle of the
too.
swamp, I saw that.
It was designed to keep the swamp at a certain elevation. That's the only thing I can assume. That actually runs diagonal and then goes into the abutting property and connects into the road drainage.
Back in the day when everybody just figured out whatever they felt like doing on their property.
Pretty much what we
Yeah.
came to the conclusion of.
It's not the first time we've seen some drainage structures where nobody could explain or even identify where they went. Okay. Are there other details or information that we need? I think generally speaking, the idea of doing this with the residential and doing a dog grooming business on the volume you're talking about here is eminently something that we can find a path to get, to say yes on. It's just kind of understanding all these little engineering details that keep everybody happy, understanding what the easement says and where the cars are gonna park and those kinds of things.
I have a question.
Of course.
If this concrete pad is holding up this, I hate it. So I don't mind moving it because I'm putting in a garage and want a driveway straight back to the garage anyways. So if that would help the parking situation from the easement, whatever it takes.
Well, that's true. So this building that you're building is a garage,
It's a
right?
garage.
So where's the car, how the car's gonna get to the garage?
I need a driveway.
Somewhere in this vicinity, there would be some asphalt going from
Yes.
Harris Avenue all
true.
the way in, and it would also provide you the space where your couple of people are gonna, just put that on your plan for next time, for
Yep.
wherever that's gonna be, because obviously if you're gonna have that, you need that, and that untangles that piece completely.
Agreed. The last topic that I believe that we need some discussion on is the request for or consideration of a sidewalk, which is something that I don't believe was ever a consideration here, but it is something I do need to clarify with this board.
Submit a waiver in writing, and you'll get it.
In previous applications, just for the note, being that this is waiver full site plan, the board can determine that it falls under that,
Okay.
Tied into that.
which
Yes.
you can certainly take that action now, which will save Kevin the effort of having to prepare a waiver just to have it negated for next time.
Okay. So, Robert, the recommendation in the staff memo is to continue even the acceptance, and if we do that, then we
Oh,
don't
yeah.
get to address the question of full site plan review. Should we consider accepting it and setting a date with some of the clarifications that we've gotten tonight? Are they sufficient to allow us to do that, or is it still the staff's recommendation to continue the whole thing?
This was Kelly's memo, so I didn't dig into it too terribly much. I guess if the board has established a level of comfort based on the presentation Kevin gave, then I'm fine with acceptance of the plan, but I would recommend continuance. But you could, that would at least allow you to take up the waiver full site, the sidewalk argument.
Yeah. Was, my understanding is Kelly's chief concern was this missing easement. and that if we know that we're gonna track that down.
If it's a Scrivener's error,
Yeah.
it's a Scrivener's error, it's a moot issue.
I know that Kevin did at the end of the day today. I didn't get a chance to look at it, but he did provide the easement. He read to the, so we know the easement exists. I don't know what it says. But yeah, but
At least that gives us enough information to move that bit forward, and if the easement doesn't support having a structure and an access on it.
But the other flip of the coin is that the easement doesn't directly affect the proposed addition. It's just information that goes on the plan. It's not impacting what the applicant is proposing to do.
Correct.
Potentially, the
As it
applicant.
relates
has-
to the driveway, I get that, but
Yeah, the applicants proposed that that's where their drop-off location is gonna be, and that's one consideration. The other is the same as the fence in the back. This would be another, intrusion across a property line that isn't supported. And so we would need essentially to decide whether that much more significant intrusion is something to be dealt with in a note, or whether, because it's an actual building, we tell the applicant we can't consider a plan that's got this
That's right.
level of noncompliance.
Point of clarification.
And that may be a different issue.
I haven't suggested that the applicant clients utilize the existing driveway. I was saying that that's an option because it
Okay.
isn't clear. And I just wanted to make that clarified. And as Kinsley very keenly pointed out, we're going to need a driveway to this proposed structure to access the garage, which would give ample room for a
That makes
client to
no
be
sense.
dropped off.
And I have little doubt that this easement is gonna support the
Right.
requirement, because there's a document and there's a building sitting in it, and these things usually match up.
so, Mr. Chairman, despite the recommendation of staff, I would move to accept the application
And I would second that.
Motion to accept the application is complete.
as complete. Yes, sir.
Second by Alistair. I support the motion. I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to it or just vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 600 to accept the application. The applicants requested a waiver of full site plan review, and as a part of that, if the board would be so inclined to waive full site plan review, we would include in the motion some treatment of sidewalks.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
So moved. I move that. I second that.
Motion to waive full site plan review, and in that, hold that sidewalks are not necessary.
Correct.
Robert,
criteria.
which one of the statutory criteria would you like to use? There should be two
Oh,
listed.
well, yeah. On the basis that.
Bill made the motion. You
Oh,
you
sorry.
gotta solve that problem.
I'll defer to the right honorable gentleman who sits to my right.
Okay. What do you got, Alistair?
On the basis that strict conformity presents an unnecessary hardship.
Okay. There is a motion properly seconded with statutory reference to waive full site plan review and determine that a sidewalk is not necessary. Discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Since we've accepted that motion passes. Since we've accepted the application, let's take the opportunity to see if there's any abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in. We will certainly have another public hearing when we come back again, but just to make sure that we've dotted all those i's and crossed all those t's. There being none, we'll close the public hearing. And now, what do we want to accomplish between now and next time, and when would you be ready to come back?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the planning board continue this meeting to July 2nd, 2019 pursuant to the 10 items that have been outlined by Kelly Chamel's May 30th memorandum to you and us, and look forward to the applicant addressing those 10 items when he and she return on July 2nd.
Is there a
support
second? Seconded by Alistair. Kevin, will that work for you, July 2nd?
I know that's a busy
I
night.
have plenty of time to address all the comments. We probably can't bump that up any closer.
The other meeting is 2 weeks from tonight, so.
Mr. Chairman, there's a couple more things that we've added that aren't in this memo, namely the note regarding the fence intrusion, the deed research and all of that.
Friendly amendment, the amendments that Mr. Disco pointed out during the context should also be included as a part of the review on discussed on July 2nd.
Excellent. Thank you for the reminder, Nelson. So whatever other additional criteria that we've described.
And I
here
trust
in our
Robert
discussion.
can get that criteria to Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, and I think Kevin was probably doing his best to keep some notes
Yep.
on those. Who knows what those are? Okay.
Does
July
July
2nd?
2nd, does that work?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of continuing to July 2nd with no further notice to abutters, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? 600. See you in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation and
Thank
for
you.
providing a lot of clarity on some of the issues that were, raised by the staff to make sure we touch
Unique
this.
application, so it's.
Unique business. Yes, thank you. Okay, item 7 on our agenda is discussion and possible action regarding other items of concern. I have one item to propose or to discuss, and that is with respect to our meeting 2 weeks hence. I would rather go attend to a family occasion and not be here, and I want to make sure that there's enough of us who will be here to have a quorum if I do that.
July the
June 18th.
June 18th. I will be here.
I will be here.
That's 2. We'll always have a town representative. That's 3.
Absolutely.
Got quite an agenda already planned that night, so I should hope we get a quorum.
Okay. What do we have on that agenda?
A few applications to review, as well as site plan review regs, which are coming up to their deadline for MS4, which have to get pushed through pretty quick.
Jeez, MS4, yep, okay.
I am comfortable with the regs as they've been edited, so my vote is support. So we probably have 4 people. Okay, so I'll let the staff know, as they already know. But okay, good. Daniel will be pleased. Any other discussion and possible action regarding other items of concern?
Wasn't there something to do with the bond reduction or something? Did I?
Yes, thank you for that reminder. I have a memo from Don Tamala, our Deputy Director Town Engineer, regarding various roads that are part of Greenfield Farms Stage 14, primarily Orchard Drive, but also Harvard Court, Bushel Court, and Baldwin Court. And the 4 of those streets together, Don has proposed that we establish a performance bond for those roads, and then, because those roads are well underway to being constructed, reduce the performance bond as she's outlined in her memo. And so, rather than going through the detailed memo, I've got Robert's Cliff Notes here for the amounts. The first vote that we would undertake is to establish a performance bond for the roads as follows. Orchard Drive, $1,947,032.36. Harvest Court, $206,937.46. Bushel Court, $194,857.13. And Baldwin Court, $192,258.72. It has the appropriate level of approval from Dawn, indicating that those are the appropriate amounts. What say you?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second? Motion and a second to establish performance bonds in those named amounts. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
What's
opposed?
the total?
Any abstaining? The total is not indicated on these sheets, but it is roughly 2.6 million.
Something on the back of that.
Yeah, that's the reductions.
Oh.
But it's 2 million and then 200,000 for each road, so 2.6 million roughly is the total of all 3. The reductions, which Dawn is suggesting based on what has already been constructed on the sites, is to reduce Orchard Drive to $695,398.50. Harvest Court, $66,943.37. Bushel Court, $70,052.25. Baldwin Court, $83,023.92.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Seconded. Second by Lynn. And so that is probably a little bit better than a 60% reduction across the board, 70% reduction. If there's no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 600 to have that action. And the applicant is aware that, 3 years hence, these performance bonds will be converted to a maintenance bond for a period.
Yep.
And we'll take up that action at the appropriate time. Got that right, Robert? Let me give you your original copies back.
I have to say, Mr. Chairman, when somebody puts down 1,947,032 and then 36 cents, I just don't understand putting the cents on the bottom. It strikes me as, never mind. Leave it
It's a very
tonight.
mechanical process where we've got a form that says every foot of X is worth so many dollars and cents, and
Yeah, I
you
know,
multiply all
I
together, and
know,
that's
I
what you
know.
get. If there are no other discussion items, looking left and looking right,
I have a couple
Nelson.
things.
let us have it.
I wanted to make the board aware of a couple things that happened last week that I attended. One of them was a presentation at the National Regional Planning Commission regarding suggested legislation and regulation on for aquifer protection areas. And it specifically gets into methodologies and so on. They did a considerable study, and they've drafted some proposed model site regulations and a model zoning overlay district. A lot of these things are already covered in our legislation that we have, but I think it's worth looking at this and seeing if there's any modifications that we should be making. So I
Sounds
think
good.
this would be a staff task, but I wanted to bring it to the board's attention.
Thank you for bringing it to attention. Is there a document or something we can distribute to board members or post on the
Well,
website or
I
something?
just have but one copy, and it's fairly lengthy, but we can get, I
Okay.
don't know that they need all of it. A lot of this is presentation material supporting it, and then there's the regulations themselves. We could certainly
Give it to
ask-
I don't want you to
Let
lose your own
PDF
copy,
it.
but if you give it to them, they'll scan it in.
Yeah, scan and PDF it.
Yeah, let them produce a PDF and we'll get it emailed to us
Yeah,
or put
okay.
it on the web or something.
That'll work.
All right,
And then you
it's
can direct
homework
us
for
back.
Robert then, right.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
don't want to let them have all the fun. Let's
Yeah,
dig into
okay,
it
good,
ourselves.
good.
What was your second?
The second thing was, this past weekend was the Spring Planning and Zoning Conference, OSI in Concord. A series of interesting presentations again, changes in land use law, changes to court interpretations of the land use laws. And I have some viewgraph materials on that, and also workforce housing. The status of the state and workforce housing was presented there. There were some handouts available, again, one copy. I think it's something we should have in our, well, we could circulate it around and have people read it. I think, from what I got from the view graphs, we, Merrimack, are pretty okay as far as some of the things that they're concerned about in some towns where they're still doing large lot restrictive housing that's, and ADUs, I think we've taken care of the ADU issue, but that was presented and discussed at some length. So very interesting presentations. I saw a few old people that used to be in Merrimack staff.
Now, Nelson, could one ask, did that presentation include the draft proposal going through our friends in Concord to have a sort of super authority that could overrule both zoning and planning boards in
Yes.
any town if it didn't give them enough workforce housing?
As far as not doing workforce housing, that particular statute that you're talking about applies to everything the planning.
Yeah,
board
I
does.
know, but
Okay, not workforce.
I know it's everything. That we could be overruled by some gentleman
That
somewhere
is-
else in.
That is still winding its way through the legislative
Yeah.
process. Is not a law yet.
I know that. I know
And,
it's just been.
yeah.
It was originally kicked out by the governor,
They
but
are-
the people have put it back again, and they're going to try and override his veto. I think.
Well, they'll keep trying at it for
Yeah.
a while anyway. More
Yeah,
now.
that
Oh,
was
well.
mentioned, they talked about it, but they talked about it as something that's hanging in there.
All
As
right.
far as the legislature is concerned, it's not a done deal.
No, I understand.
There was a lot of opposition to that bill. A lot of opposition to that bill, so.
They only treated it slightly at this meeting.
I know, but it's to my mind, it's an unfortunate
idea, never mind whether there's opposition. I just don't think, I think it's something we should all fight against, but anyway.
No, we
It was
should.
presented fairly positively by the people there, but.
All right, I just
not-
asked.
The
not
couple of
very-
times I've
not
heard
in any
it
depth.
discussed in Concord, the BIA and the Housing Finance Authority simply look at it in a black and white approach,
Correct.
saying, is it pro-workforce housing? Yes, it is, then I want it. And they don't really dive into the mechanics
Yeah.
and say, what will this
Yeah.
do, or are there any unintended consequences in some
Right.
of that thing? So even when you have the hearings before the various committees, people will come and testify and say, boy, we need workforce housing, and we're dying, or 20,000 short, and this will help, so vote for it. And nobody opens the hood and says, you know, this engine won't run.
There are members on the NRPC that actually support it. A couple of people down in Pelham and in Hudson, I guess, vocalized their support for the particular bill, but for the
bill
majority
with
of the
three
people.
Really?
Yeah, there was a couple, but
Yeah.
the majority are against it. The
Yeah.
NRPC's decided not to take a position because there's no unanimity on whether they should be for
No
it or
consensus,
against it.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. So in a town with a planning board that's kind of run amok and they're saying no to things on subjective grounds and really aren't following their own regulations, and there's really nothing local residents can do about it because everything that you try to do about it is a fortune to go appeal. There's some appeal to the idea of saying somebody has got to step in and do something when, you know,
Yeah.
whatever.
It's
Oh, well.
it's overreach.
Oh, I agree. I think it's a terrible idea.
It's a terrible idea.
I-
It's overreach.
I've never supported it. I just.
No, anecdotal, I get it.
Yeah.
I just,
And again, you're losing local control.
Yes.
that was gonna be my next statement. so.
And you're paying these people are gonna be full-time people that are paid separately. You know, there's paid a salary to be on these boards.
Well, and you won't find those. I mean, one of the earlier versions, I don't know if this ever got cleaned up in some of the drafts, but one of the early versions said that you're going to have three people. One is an engineer, one's a lawyer. I don't forget what the third one was.
Judge.
Retired judge.
And the lawyer and the engineer need to have a lot of experience in planning and development, and during their term, not work in the industry. And so
Right.
which engineer do we see in front of us who makes their living drawing plans and seeing, representing people, is gonna say, you know what, I'd like to give up all that lucrative business and go sit on your board for 2 years because I've got experience in this and I'll be a good judge? Nobody. Nobody's ever gonna do that. Now, who would be willing to do it? Some engineer who's never actually designed anything. Or some
Well,
lawyer
it
who
might
doesn't
be-
actually earn a living.
I would counter that,
Lawyer.
Mr. Chairman. If somebody's reached the tender age of 75 or 76, it might be a nice sinecure for the end of their working life.
Correct.
I think some of the engineers that we've seen here do very, very well at their day job and aren't looking to be a state employee for,
All right.
anyway, neither here nor there. Other items of concern to discuss? Thank you, Nelson, for bringing up those two.
Okay, I'll bring these hazardous substance things to Tim or to Robert. And the other.
The other
I don't know how
materials.
you'd like to handle it, yeah.
That organization may supply us with copies of it now that we're members of it, and we can do that.
should be able to
Or not. I'm afraid of just scanning things and putting them on the website.
This isn't NHMA, this is through the State Office of Strategic
So-
Initiatives, so
Yes.
I don't, seeing you have to pay to register to get in there, I don't know that we're gonna get copies of it if you weren't an attendee.
Given that it's a bound volume with some
Yeah.
publication and work behind it, I think copying it and throwing it up on the website for the world to have for free probably would
It-
not be pleasing to
It
them.
might be on the website.
Yep.
You know, this is put out by the Office of State Planning, and they want people to read them and have them. And they didn't have enough that I could take a copy for every planning board member, but it may in fact be on the web already, on their website.
Okay.
Okay.
With that in
Maybe.
mind, could you peek and see if it is? And if it is, send us a link. And if it's not, if you would choose to and be willing to, share your book with any of the members of the board who'd like to read it, and we could just pass it around until everybody's had a
I
chance
can
with
do
it.
that, yeah, okay,
And hopefully there's a link and we just share it and everybody can have their own.
yeah.
Okay, I don't have any other items of concern. Does anybody else have any?
Just, I don't know when the appointment process is as it relates to the National Regional Planning Commission. Karen Elmer and Tim Tanave have been active participants and been tremendously effective in their roles serving on the NRPC. There are two other individuals that I'm not going to name, but they have been AWO well since their appointment. And I would encourage my planning board members to actively seek new people to sit on that board, because the NRPC is growing. As Matt alluded to tonight, there are certain things that they are working on right now. Obviously, the bicycle pedestrian corridor plan being one of the many things that they work on. But in terms of environmental planning, they had an active role as it relates to the dare I say, when the pipeline was being proposed to come through the southern part of New Hampshire. They got actively engaged in that particular process, and they're currently actively engaged as it relates to the PFAS situation that seems to be impacting not just Merrimack, but Bedford and Litchfield. So and Pease, but I'm thinking more of the
immediate locality.
The immediate location. So it's really crucial that we encourage new people to apply for whenever those two vacancies come up. I'm hoping that new people apply for the position, because I will not be supporting the status quo.
Thank you for letting us know that, and your statement is certainly, broadcast with the rest of our meeting, and I certainly use my voice here to say, if anyone's interested, please reach out to the department or let the board know. I agree with you. If we've got members that aren't participating, then we need to find members who are participating when there's a chance to renew it. It doesn't serve us to be underrepresented in a venue like that, because Mason will show up with 4 votes. I mean, they don't really vote on a whole lot, but they'll have 4 voices in the room, and not to criticize them, but we're the second biggest kid on the block.
We're the second biggest kid. We pay the second largest amount of dues to the NRPC. We should be adequately represented for the tax dollars that we're asking the taxpayers to pay for us to participate on the commission. So
our normal full panel is 4 people.
Correct.
Representing us in that group. And we should make sure that we're getting 4 active people.
Correct.
Also, my memory is that every single time that we've had an appointment to that, we've asked somebody, show up at the planning board once in a while and tell us what you guys are working on. Right. It has happened a total of, zero times. Yeah. Let me check my math.
See, you got it
that
right.
was 0 times that we've had someone that we've appointed to this actually come back to us and tell us what's up. I know that we had gotten some reports, some connection from Tom Koenig, who has been able to be a communication conduit for us. And now I assume that we'll have your opportunities too. So, yep. Okay. Other items of concern to discuss? Then we're up to the item 8 on our agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of May 21, 2019. What is the will of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion we accept the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion?
Yeah, line 4 and line 6. Tom Koenig and I are town councilors. We're not ex officio. I understand the term of ex officio because that is technically what we are, but I think in layman's terms, we should be identified as the town councilor and town council alternate.
Okay.
Okay.
That way, if anybody 20 years from now decides to read these minutes, they'll know what a town councilor is and not who's ex officio.
Any other comments or questions on these minutes? All in favor of approving them with the amendment, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining?
I am abstaining, Mr. Chairman.
3 abstentions, so 303 to adopt the minutes. Robert, did you catch all these abstentions for the record? Lynn, Neil, and Bill, yes. So we're going over the names of the Beatles for a second there. If there's no other business before the board,
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion we adjourn.
is there a second? Second by Mr. Disco. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 600 to adjourn. Thank you very much for all the work, and please don't forget to turn your microphone off.